Is she open?
Okay, thanks everyone to Fáilte Roibh agus Máidín Moy. We do have a quorum and I now call the meeting to order. I welcome all members to the 57th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, and all devices should be muted, please. Password details are available in the gallery for anyone wanting to connect to Assembly's Wi-Fi network, and no recordings or photographs may be taken. Can I remind members about the protocol regarding use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly in a way which does not interfere with proceedings, and please be aware of cameras and the sensitivity of the microphones throughout the course of the meeting. Thank you. Agenda item 1, members, is declaration of interest. I would remind members of responsibility to declare any interest in any of the items under discussion today. So I do want to declare that I'm a trustee of a charity, of a local charity, given some of the events we're discussing today. Any other, Melissa?
I with Nice Golden Jerica, chairperson of a local charity.
Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, charity trustee, and also declare private sector landlord in case it cuts across some of the housing topics.
Yeah, thanks Andy. Kelly?
An associate member of the board of the Chartered Institute of Housing, and also to say that my constituency office works quite closely with the Bryson Group to issue those vouchers in the winter.
Thank you.
Likewise, Chair, probably should have declared that as well. We were a stakeholder involved with the various different schemes with Bryson.
Yep, thanks Andy. And I'll also declare actually that I own a private rented property, and also my office has worked closely with Bryson in relation to that scheme. Any other interest, members? Okay, moving. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Sorry, Chair, I just see in correspondence or something about the licensing review. My family own licensed premises.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Okay, thanks, members. Moving on to agenda item 2 then. Apologies. Can I check, Clerk, are you aware of any apologies?
Sean Mulholland.
Sean Mulholland, thank you. And we're not aware of any other apologies? No, thank you. Members not aware of any. Have we full quorum apart from that? So moving on then, members to, are we missing something?
Just Pam.
All right, so members aware of any other apologies? No, thank you. Okay, agenda item 3 then is Chair's business. You will recall, members, we were briefed last week on the disability and work strategy, and were told that the Minister would make a statement on it this week and launch a 12-week consultation. At page 7 of your table papers there for item 5.8, you will see an email sent on Monday stating that the statement will be delayed until October. However, no reason for the delay was provided. Are members content that we write to the Department Minister to ask what the reasons are for the delay in the statement and the launch of the consultation on this draft strategy?
Agreed.
Yeah, thank you. Members, just... Yeah, I think that's all for Chair's business. Let me see where we're going next. Yeah, we're moving on to agenda item 4, which is draft minutes, which are contained on for the meeting of the 25th of September at page 7. Are members content to agree the minutes of 25th September as drafted?
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising, members, then. You've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 17. Can I ask if members have any comments or issues you wish to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to regarding items 5.2 to 5.5? And if I could just flag their items 5.3 and 5.4 in the context, members, of this committee's statutory role in terms of budget scrutiny, I remain concerned, I have to say. And that concern is that several Department for Communities funding announcements have been made via the media without any prior notification to the committee. While the musical instruments programme and the intention to launch a community infrastructure grant were signalled to the Assembly in a ministerial statement on the 2nd of June, detailed information only reached us after the public launch. We've also seen no prior committee notification for a number of other announcements. For example, the Travel Award for bands, the America 250 Culture Fund, the Ulster Scots Agency Uplift and the Downpatrick Public Realm Scheme, and it is not clear from the Department's written updates where these allocations sit. This committee has a statutory role to undertake scrutiny, and an important part of that scrutiny must be in relation to the budget and budgetary decisions. So would members be content that we write to the Minister seeking an explanation for this situation, a commitment to notify the committee in advance of any future public announcements, and to ask for a paper mapping each 2025 announcement to its budgeting line and monitoring position, so we can apply that scrutiny to those lines. Go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say, Chair, look, it's always very annoying whenever a minister doesn't give the committee a heads up. But what I was going to say was the standing orders have been changed, that the executive is supposed to bring forward information 4 weeks after the end of the summer recess period. We haven't seen that list of the legislative commitments for the rest of the year. Could we perhaps ask in that letter for the Minister to confirm what legislation's coming forward, because that may well tie into some of these announcements as well. The other thing is, in the papers today, I noted that the department has £15 million of overspend. Now, if no new money comes within this year, where's that money going to be cut from, and why, whenever it says in the papers that discretionary payment areas are being restricted, are all these new funds coming forward? Where are they coming from? And I think as a committee we just need to know that. The other thing, and it'll be obviously for the committee to decide, could we write to AERC to ask them to review the matter regarding ministers and the announcements, because my concern is that we've received information, of course, from the Speaker, which is right to do so, confirming that he's written to ministers to tell them about making announcements in the chamber rather than going to the media first. But his only reaction to that will be to potentially delay an urgent written statement or an urgent statement to the House. I think it would be time for AERC to look at the actions that could be taken by a Speaker, so that ministers do know that failing to inform the House or committees appropriately should carry a little bit more penalty, and maybe make ministers think a little bit more to respect the House.
Members content that we write to Eric in that regard? And Clerk, have you got the detail of the
ARC one? Yes.
Yep.
And we've asked for the legislative commitments already as a committee, but we can also chase that up in the letter.
No heads up on that yet?
Not yet.
That's in quite a while, that request.
We could, if we wanted to, write to the Speaker and ask, in line with the new standing orders, where is this? Because that would be the whole executive, which of course other departments have an implication here too.
Yeah. Members content we do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, members. So can I check if members then have any other items within 5.2 to 5.5 they wish to flag up before we go to table papers on matters arising? No?
Just
go ahead,
5.5, I know that we've already, aren't we contacting the ICO about the data breach for clarification? We still haven't received that, I'm sure.
That letter would have only gone the other day. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Kelly. So members, then at page 5 of your table papers, there's a response from the Speaker to this committee's letter regarding the Minister making a major announcement in relation to the NI Football Fund without formally notifying the committee in advance. So I'm just checking if members have any comments in relation to that item. Kelly?
It relates back to what I've just said. You know, the Speaker has highlighted that it is convention in this, well, it's actually part of the rules of this place where statements are due to be met, but unfortunately the Speaker's ability to go back to ministers about this is limited really just to those delaying any statements to the House. I think that there needs to be something there. That's why I've mentioned about writing to AERC to ask for a review of that, what could be possible. Okay, thank you. Otherwise content, members. Moving on to correspondence at agenda. Mark, go ahead.
Well, I'll come in here, Chair. Otherwise, the only other place would have been under correspondence and the media clippings. And it's about the Northern Ireland Football Fund announcement. I suppose it's now a fortnight since we had officials in, and we had questions for them that weren't answered. We subsequently wrote to them with additional questions, as well as underlining the ones that we didn't feel had been answered satisfactorily. The Minister has said publicly now about his consideration, or he was considering publishing the submissions that had come up to him on it, but can we chase that up and say, you know, when is he considering doing this? because as you outlined at the start, Chair, we're a scrutiny committee, and this is something that I fully believe requires full scrutiny.
So, follow up with correspondence to ask when a response will be forthcoming. Okay.
Members content?
Well, there's the answers to the questions that we've asked. I'd like to have thought they should have been answered by now, to be honest. But subsequently to that, and it's in the media clippings today, the Minister has said publicly, he says to me in the Assembly, that he was now considering publishing the advice that he had received, the submissions he had received from officials. So is he still considering that, or when is he considering publishing it?
Yeah, well, it'll be published. Yeah.
Okay. Did we make a formal request for the actual copy of it? I think we did.
We made a formal request with a lot of sub-elements to it. You know, the criteria, the report from the independent monitor. There was quite a few sub-elements in it, yeah.
Okay, Kelly?
Could we write to the department to ask them for the process that they use for responding to committee questions? You know, how many days, turnaround, and what's the targets and all of that, please?
Yeah. Members content? Okay, thank you, members. Moving on then to item 6, then is correspondence and the memos at page 51. I will intend to draw out items by number in a single group and ask if you want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. So first of all, can I ask if members have any comments in relation to items 6.2 to 6.6? And one that I do want to flag up there, or a couple that I want to flag up, is there's an invitation in from QUB around an AI conference. I think that looks particularly interesting and relevant and timely. If members are content, I would certainly hope to take up that invitation. It's to myself and the Deputy Chair, so members content that we look at that. Also, Ulster Hockey have asked to brief committee in relation to facilities. Members' thoughts on that? Happy to?
Yep.
Yeah, content to bring that in, yeah. Okay. So can I ask if members then have any comments in relation to 6.2 to 6.6? Any other comments? No. In relation to 6.7 to 6.12, I just draw your attention to item 6.12. Would you be content that that item be forwarded to the department for comment on the issues raised?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, members. Any other 6.7 to 6.12? Any other?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kelly.
6.9, that outturn and forecast outturn is terrifying. I am very concerned. The overspend in the departments is incredible, and I appreciate there's monitoring rounds due, so some of that may not be such a concern. But you know, looking at the amount, given health's overspend, my concern is for the Department for Communities is if all of the other departments have to relinquish funds in order to cover that overspend, where we need to find out more from the department. They're thinking of what will have to be cut back. I already know that, for instance, the money for the new builds has not been issued yet. So, you know, we have a lot of stuff it's in delay at the moment within the department. Are those items at risk? We're already behind in our new build targets from the housing supply strategy. So it would be good to find out a written briefing or an in-person briefing from the department about the outturn, their over commitments and budget, the 15 million, and what happens should, you know, the department or the Minister for Finance have to call in monies from each department to cover that, because this is a very serious matter now. If they're talking about already discretionary payments, now it's not necessarily discretionary support payments, but if discretionary payments are being called back, we have a minister who's talking about all these new funds coming up and awarding new monies. But does that mean then that people on benefits with welfare mitigations are going to lose out? I don't know where this money's coming from.
Yeah, and it remains obviously the anti-poverty strategy is now completed in consultation, needing resourced and all of that. So there's huge concerns around that and how that's all being prioritised and managed and accounted for. Maybe better to get it in writing first, would it be? And just so we have the detail, and then
so we're going to ask for a DFC specific financial briefing relating to that documentation that came from the Finance Committee
Yeah, I think so.
in relation to the areas that are over committed.
Yeah. I think it's worth if they could let us know what's the risk levels for each of the areas of funding given their overspend and the potential executives overspend and what actions they're doing to ensure that what matters most is going to be delivered.
Okay.
Yeah, members content. Thank you. So items 6.13 to 6.16 in correspondence in members. Can I just draw out your attention to 6.16? Would members be content that we accept the offer of a briefing on the fraud, error and recovery bill from the department as soon as possible and for the committee team to schedule that in for us?
Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Any other items from 6.13 to 6.16 that members would like to flag up?
Yeah, Chair, I see 6.13 and 6.14. Both of those look really, really good, but both of them have those items have been scheduled. One's for plenary and one is for when this committee sits. I don't know how we can get it out to interested organisations and communities to sort of say, guys, we can't attend if we have to do the job that's here.
That's right, I agree, and I see that nearly every week with something you really would love to be at, would need to be at in some cases, would benefit from being at, and really, really good events, but they're impossible to even consider. Yeah. I think that is a fair point. That I'm not sure how we do that.
Whether you write back and just say, unfortunately, well, thankfully we're up and sitting, but Mondays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays are out for this committee anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and maybe I think we should make some effort maybe.
Reply back to the senders,
Yeah, that'll be useful.
On that, Chair, the 6.14 falls into the same category.
Yeah.
That's it's on committee day, I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's actually on
it's on plenary.
Yeah, plenary, yeah.
So right back to both in the...
Yep, we can, yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Anything else then, members, in relation to that before we move to tabled correspondence? So then there's a tabled correspondence memo at page 9 of your tabled papers. Do members have any comments on from 6.18 to 6.23? I would like to draw members' attention to 6.19, which is a complaint from an individual in relation to housing. Are members content that a reply is sent to advise that the committee is not empowered to get involved in individual matters and to refer to the department to confirm that it is content is being dealt with via the proper procedures? Content. Thank you, members. Any other comments, members? 6.18 to 6.23. And can I check if members have any comments on items 6.23 to 6.28? All members content with that. Thank you. Okay, members. So I'll just check with clerk. Do we have our guest for the first?
Yeah, I believe we do, yeah.
Yep. So members, we're moving on to agenda item 7, which is our first briefing of the day. And this is from the Bryson Charitable Group briefing on the emergency fuel payment scheme.
We
So,
have an additional person attending as well.
okay.
Morning.
Called Stephen Farry.
Okay. So, members, we're joined this morning by Bryson Charitable Group, who are going to brief us on the emergency fuel payment scheme. Members have been provided with a copy of the briefing paper at page 361. I now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Ciaran Logan, who's CEO of Bryson Charity Group, and we're also joined by Stephen Kelly. Stephen, you're very welcome to Fulcher Road, Foster. So Ciaran, I believe it is yourself that maybe is going to make an opening statement. If you could go ahead and do that, and then we'll come to members' comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, everybody, for allowing us to be in front of you today. Most people don't know, or many people don't know, who Bryson are and what we do. So if it's okay, I'll take a brief minute to describe who we are more broadly, to put the thing into context. We quite deliberately don't seek publicity. We just try to get on and get it done. So we were founded 119 years ago to help what was then deemed to be the deserving poor. Thankfully, we've morphed away from that because there are no deserving or undeserving poor. Nobody deserves to be poor. And what we have tried to do repeatedly is to seek out problems that the society, the state, economy, companies, individuals can't fix, to create solutions, to seek the best solutions from around the world, and to bring these here local, to test them, to prove them, and then to pass them on. And at least 24 charities here have their origins in Bryson. A few good examples of that are social work. Just after the First World War, at a time when there was mass migration from the country into towns and cities, at a time when there was the Spanish flu, and at a time when there was great deprivation and trauma from the First World War, we went to America and Canada and found social work as one of their key ways of trying to deal with this and help people, particularly those in extreme poverty. So we brought it back here. We had lectures every Friday. We tested it, proved it, and spread it into both Queen's and Trinity. And we still would train 50 to 100 social workers a year. At a time when there was only private housing, we built 300 houses with our own money in the early 20s to prove that if people had good quality housing that was dry, not rat infested or otherwise infested, indoor bathrooms, warm, that rates of education would improve, crime fall, employment increase, life expectancy increase, and health improve. And then we passed that in to what is now housing executive and housing associations, but it took about 15 years to prove it. Similarly, at a time when if you couldn't afford a solicitor or barrister, you could lose your family, your liberty, your possessions, your job, and we got 20 solicitors, 10 barristers to volunteer free. And that had a great impact on trying to remove injustice, and that has since morphed into free legal aid and other charities, including Citizens Advice. So we operate right across the north. If you look at a heat map of our employment and the people we help, it's almost identical to the population. We have nearly 1,100 staff. Every year we help about 60,000, nearly 70, and about 20-25 of those in a very intense long-term way. We offer over 50 services right across health, education, employment, income, environment, and other things. We operate mainly in Northern Ireland, but we do have a presence in both Donegal and in Wales. So we exist to make the greatest difference where there is the greatest need, and the way in which we'll try and make the difference to the greatest need is to maximise people's potential. So meet them at their point of need, meet them at the crisis, meet them at the edge of the cliff, and then create an individual tailored plan that will take them permanently away from that cliff by maximising their potential. I think it's fair to say that we mirrored a lot of what was going on, and charities for the last 20-30 years have changed, and not necessarily for the better. In many ways, charities have become an extension of the state, and very significant parts of their funding have been from the state, and there's been mass subcontracting of state activities into charities. Now that's very good, because you have people who are really driven, whose purpose is to make the difference. So you can't decry that, but the danger with that is you're living on very fine margins, and you can be part of the problem rather than fighting to create or seeking to find a solution. So we were organised with our 40-50 services along the lines of health, of education, of employment. We didn't actually join the things up to provide maximum benefit for the people we serve. So where we started to change, which leads into the emergency relief pot here, is that at the start of the pandemic, 90-odd% of what we did was deemed to be key work, and that left me with 10-odd%, including dozens of social workers who weren't deemed key, but I said, look, we have to be key. So in the first few weeks, we took 500,000 of our own reserves, and we just went round the most deprived areas and knocked on doors and said, how can we help you? And people were very receptive to help at that stage, because like everybody, we didn't know what on earth was going on. And so a lot of people who'd been very resistant to help in the past were suddenly really willing to engage. And we helped them with money. We helped them with emotional support, largely through our small army of social workers. We helped them with white goods. We helped them with whatever their point of need was. We met them and helped them. And we found then that we were meeting people not where we thought their point of need was, not where the state system or applying it to a state system thought their point of need was, but actually where it manifested for them. So, I'll give you an example. We came across a young girl who was severely diabetic, drifting in and out of consciousness. The family had a portable fridge which wasn't working. She was insulin dependent, and the insulin was at the wrong temperature. They were trying to keep the insulin at the right temperature in a bucket of cold water, which didn't work, obviously. So we got a portable fridge back, and they were terrified to go to social service anyway, or a doctor. They thought their children would be taken away from them. So we got the fridge. Within 24 hours, the daughter was right as rain again because the insulin was the right temperature. But we were then able to get all the children into school when they hadn't been. We were able to get the parents reading and writing because they couldn't. We were able to get them into work. And we've worked with them for about 5 years now, and they're thriving. And that to our shame, in the first few weeks, we helped 5,200 people. But over 4,000 of them weren't known to us and weren't known to the state. So you have very high incidence here of people who struggle to read and write, who certainly aren't digitally connected because they can't afford broadband, and if they could afford it, they don't know how to work it. And so we found we had to go to the doors and be people's help at their most extreme need, and then work with them for as long as it took. So in the cost of living crisis, we worked with the utility regulator, the Consumer Council, and the energy companies. And listen, fair play to them, because there's been a lot of charters make no difference at all, but actually there was a consumer charter which changes every year, and we've worked really intensively in the trenches with the energy companies to get what often was a kind of a global standard system which didn't suit people who were in dire need, who were terrified, who struggled to read, to write, to communicate. And they have changed dramatically how they do their business, and fair play to them. Many of them also contributed to a fund, and in this context I have to give credit to two in particular. So SSE have been very generous, and Mutual Energy have been even more so. And Mutual Energy are very like ourselves. People may not know, Mutual Energy is a mutual company. It exists to serve its consumers in the same as we exist to serve the objects of our charity, the people we help. And 100% of their profits go to reinvest into consumers, and in this case we've worked with them to look at the poorest consumer, those who earn under household income is about 26,500 or less. I'll come back to that. And the bulk of it has been on providing emergency relief, but it's also allowed us, as we've got to them in emergency relief, to triage them, to understand their other needs, because it will typically present as can't pay electricity or fuel bills. But behind that tip of the iceberg are many other causes, and we're able, through that door opener, that emergency relief, that edge of the cliff point, to then work with them, understand where is their potential, where are their hard spots, and which of our 40, 50 services do we need to tailor to them to move their lives forward on all four of the main fronts of health, education, employment and income. Mm-hmm. Interestingly, on the scheme, whereas the threshold, the provable threshold is 26,500, it was a few thousand less a few years ago, the average is typically half of that. So you're looking at people who are households trying to survive on just north of £1,000 a month, which is extremely challenging. So we have a long-term view with Mutual Energy and the Regulator Consumer Council and the energy companies that we need to make a big shift here, and I believe we are together, and I believe all of them deserve credit. We have learned quite a bit here, and we've got quite a bit of research. And I forget, maybe if it's okay, I'll just share the 4 or 5 key learnings that we have with you. So when we work together, we're very effective to a common goal. That the barriers, the state does a really good job, actually, and the state gets criticised a lot, but does a really good job in education, in health and employment. Most things actually are very good. But for those who are at the margins, the solution, the need is complex. It's not simply health. It's not simply education. We need people. The people have been failed by us as a society, or may have failed themselves. I actually don't care. But we need to meet them at their point of need and have a tailored solution across multidisciplines. That solution has to be based on results. That solution can't just be, oh, we'll do a 3-month programme or a 2-year programme and then we'll walk away. We've got to have results in terms of getting people moving up the scales on education, in terms of tangible, measurable results on their health, because vast swathes of effort and money are wasted by putting it into initiatives to programmes without defined returns. A significant minority are so traumatised that they can't engage. And so we spend a lot of work. We have an Australian academic and psychiatrist who's worked around the world, and we've worked with them for about 10 years. How do you get people individually and collectively out of trauma, to get them over the start line, to move their lives forward? The solutions are unique to the individual. The mass state solutions don't work, and we need to work for as long as it takes. This work can be quickest we see lives turned round, typically permanently a couple of years. Generally it's 5 years, and it could be 20. But we've got to stick at it for as long as it takes. And when the people fall back again, we've got to help them forward again. It can't just be one-off. The final thing I'd say is that we need to try and use, in our opinion, the potential of net zero to drive down poverty. Net zero needs to be focused most on the poorest, because we will get the biggest return. We'll get the biggest return in terms of helping people stay out of poverty. We'll get the biggest return so that people in the most deprived areas, rather than being bottom of the league tables, have something to be top of the league tables about, something to be proud about. When a house is brought up to a net zero standard, it's almost like having a new house, and it's an opportunity to really raise up the housing capital, the housing stock, to give people, and it goes back to us building the 300 houses in the 20s, people have to have good quality, excellent accommodation in which they can thrive, be educated, be safe, be healthy. Chair, that's it. I hope that's okay.
Absolutely, no. It's a fascinating presentation from your perspective. I have to say, and I'm sure all of my colleagues are more than well aware of who Bryson are in the first instance, as a result of probably some of the work we do with your organisation around that very specific, dedicated, practical support. And I do want to thank you for bringing that scheme forward. But also I want to thank and acknowledge your staff who have implemented it. I have found them to be excellent in terms of their engagement, their practicality, their passion for this work as well. So that's really noticeable. As a social worker myself, it is so many of the things you say do strike a very loud bell in terms of concern, but also in terms of where the potential solutions are. One of the first meetings I did after becoming an MLA was Sean Holland launched the social work poverty work down in the Skino Centre, and I would love to know how has the potential of that been realised. I suspect I know the answer. It's more of the question for another committee, and we have lots to do today in relation to this work, but it's something that has always struck me as having just come out of being a social worker and seeing that, and I thought that is so much of what we need to be doing. The other thing I want to acknowledge, just in terms of your remarks, is around that issue about how much of our statutory services are being delivered by the charity sector. Often charities being pushed into picking up the slack by the statutory sectors, only at times to be left high and dry in the ebbing tide of finance, where they're then struggling to get the finance to do the work that has been required of them, and they have been so vital in doing. So I think that is something that over a longer period of time we need to look at how we make that more sustainable, and where services should be statutory, they're brought into the statutory system in that sense. And I also, just as you were speaking, part of me was thinking about the role of independent social work and whether or not social work as a profession needs to become more advocate and fighting on behalf of people around the practicalities from what you're saying. I think there's plenty of scope for that, and I know plenty of social workers would agree with that also. So thank you for the presentation. It's very welcome and timely. I suppose one of the things that I wanted to ask you was in relation to who do you see as the people most at risk of being missed by the state systems in your experience, and you're working with a lot of those. You would have, as you stated, during COVID, a lot of people who weren't involved in any support or receiving any support. So, and then also the energy crisis, you will have picked up on numbers. So how can government better identify and support those people at risk of falling outside of the support loop?
So there are objective numbers about poverty, and I think we need to try to talk numbers, because a lot of what we were saying was about role of social work, strategies. The first thing we need to do is look at where we are now and what results we want. So the official statistics would say that the poorest 75%, poorest 3% roughly, is where we need to look, and they're measured. There are objective measures for education, health, income and employment. So we need to make sure we know exactly who those people are, and a lot of those people aren't known to us because they don't have GPs, they don't have national insurance numbers, they're terrified of the state, they think the kids are going to be taken away, they're going to lose their liberty. There's, for whatever reasons, there is a gap. So we need to make sure that we know who the people are. We need to then look at what result do we want, and the result we want is that within 20 years or faster, all 75,000 are out of poverty permanently and objectively. So we need to have all effort going up the same mountain, and at the minute we don't know exactly who's there well enough. We don't know their point of need exactly well enough, and all effort isn't combined to ending poverty within a defined time. I come from part of my background is professional sport, and everything is about results and return on investment. So we've got to have all effort driving those measures of poverty, education, health, and so on, to out of the poverty line. So if there's one thing that could be done, it's to have the goal of ending poverty, 75,000 people out of poverty within 20 years, and have everybody joined up to that, all government departments, all charities, all activities, whether it's social work strategy, to fuel poverty strategy, whatever it is, everybody joined up that we're all going up the same mountain.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do agree, and I think that's an interesting sort of addition to the anti-poverty strategy debate and where that needs to be. But I'll not dwell on that for now. Just to follow on, the last part of this for me before we go to members is what then are the barriers. So we've talked about the people. What are the specific barriers that often create a difficulty, such as literacy or IT or whatever, and what specific interventions should we be thinking of to remove those barriers?
It's the first thing was need not to overstate it. We've helped about in the last few years about 75,000 people with emergency relief, 75,000 households, and only about 20% or just less require repeated assistance. So let's be clear what the problem is we're dealing with. The existing way of dealing with things. So let me take education. Education have made great strides forward in the numbers of children free school meals getting 5 GCSEs or more. So listen, credit where it's due, but for the bit, which is about 12,000 children who are our people, they don't get specific enough attention, and actually education can't do it by itself. So we need to have, it needs to be joined up to the individual person, family, whether the need is health, education, but whatever it is. Literacy rates, digital rates, so less than half the people we deal with are digitally connected. Well less than half the people we deal with understand what we're talking about. So the one size fits all digital solution for those who can't, fathom it, understand it, aren't in place, and their fears are different. So we need to be very individual and understand the individual as a person, as a family, and then be determined to take them out. So I don't know if that's answering your question.
No, it is. I think what you're saying is person-centred.
Yeah.
Discover what the specific issue is and work on that, and do that in a cross-community, cross-cutting, cross-departmental way, and that's very useful.
Yes.
Kelly, I'll go to yourself.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just distracted
Yes,
there by one of our colleagues. Don't need to say that. Thank you very much, folks. And before you come in today, I declared an interest. My office is one of the offices that certainly gets the applications in for the energy support scheme, and we are extraordinarily busy with it. I know that last year, it's a small number, but 85 went out, and the difference it's made in my community and the community has been immense. You mentioned earlier on, Ciaran, about net zero being key. Now, I visited the housing executives North Belfast Street that has those houses that they own have been retrofitted, and the cost of their energy is so low. I also went to the Four Winds. There was a new development, a fortune to buy these houses, but the expenditure for that household is so low, it's incredible. Later we'll be hearing a bit more about that, but what I'm interested in with your energy suppliers, I'm aware that in Oma, Energy Cloud have attachment onto the immersion heaters. It costs about £200, and whenever there's surplus energy produced in Northern Ireland, it kicks in, turns on for the hot water and runs. I'm just wondering, is there any opportunity? I'm very appreciative of the £200 for electricity or gas, but it's a bit like teach a man to fish. Is there something there that could be done for a long term that £200 could be used for those types of net zero?
We are we're working on that system, and we're trialling it. Yes. I don't know the exact numbers. It's tens, and yes, that is a good system. So, but what we find, so we have an energy bit, and again with Mutual Energy's help last year, we helped about 150 households trialled, and this year we'll double that. And we're trying the surplus energy scheme to reduce immersion heat costs or water costs. We're trialling that. But there are various other ways of insulation, of double glazing, of low measures, but actually the biggest barrier isn't any of those. The biggest barrier is people understanding behaviours. Let me give you, if you can't count, you can't measure your electricity or your gas consumption. If you can't count, you're terrified of your bill, you're terrified of your paying. So we find the greater barrier isn't the physical measures. The greater barrier in the first instance is understanding, functioning. Now you're quite right, we then need to have to be able to scale it up, and we also have retrofitted a fair number of houses to prove it can be done. We've done it about different communities because we're trying to create proof and interest. And it's a wee bit like satellite dishes. Once half a dozen people gather on mobile phones in the early days, everybody wanted to get this. We're trying to create momentum in that direction. So there's no doubt technology, retrofitting, absolutely right up there. But to begin with, we need to get people literate, numerate, positive, wanting to make changes.
I'm very interested. The amount of people that you guys have been helping has identified a data set of people. Now, I appreciate Bryson is Bryson. It's a huge charitable organisation, but it can't be everywhere. So the data of the people that you're helping, say for instance, I'm Strangford constituency, so that includes Newton Ards. We give out the vouchers. There's data there. We know that these people are in difficulty. I know that the people who we're putting forward the applications for are exactly as you're talking about. They do have literacy issues. They do have just... Even to speak to them about measures that could help them and save money is very difficult because it's very defensive. You know, what am I doing wrong? You're not doing anything wrong, but here's how we can help you. How do you use that data to make sure that it doesn't just sit somewhere else, because it's so big an issue that Bryson couldn't possibly cover it all.
No, we can't. So what we do in the first instance is take the data to make sure that we have a spread that represents the population, so that we're giving it out fairly. And obviously demand exceeds supply, so we have to ration. So if it's 85 or per MLM, or sure, we have to ration it out to ensure it's fairly allocated.
I think it's usually about 25, but
but whatever it is, so we have to ration it out. And we also work with big numbers of local community groups, small groupings, to make sure that it's fairly done. We work really intensively in quite a bit of Northern Ireland, not all of it, and we work even more intensively in 5 or 6 geographies, and it helps inform our planning moving forward. But listen, we're quite happy to share the data with whoever can usefully use it.
Yeah. It's just it seems like such a simple act to get an application in for help with energy, but it's that key data, as you say. It's the people that we all have difficulty reaching.
So that bit is the tip of the iceberg, and it's all the root causes and all the struggles and all the, I think it's going to take 20 years, but I think the important thing is that we're all aligned. In 20 years, we're not going to have this anymore. Yeah. And by geography, by department, we're all going up the same mountain. Well, we will not have poverty in 20 years.
Just my final question, Chair. Anti-poverty strategy is key in all of this, because that's the thing that can draw all of the departments together to focus on getting rid of poverty in Northern Ireland. But I'm just wondering, I look at housing and I look at energy costs at the moment, and if you're wealthy, you can get very low energy costs. You could, if you bought one of those beautiful £300,000 houses that I've been to see, and your energy costs for a month are no more than £80, and you're charging your electric car off the house as part of that. Are we at risk, if we don't start to work together as government, of creating a them and us, so that those that have money can access the least cost energy, and those that don't, because of their situation, then are still going to be kept in fuel poverty because of that?
Well, I think there's 2 or 3 things. I think the first thing is that tariffing. We would like to see, Mutual Energy would like to see, I think most people in the energy sector would like to see differential tariffing. That for the first bit of your tariff to a good subsistence level, it's much cheaper, and then it's more expensive. So that the more you use, actually the more it costs, not the less. And if you had the first level up to people so they could afford to cook, to be warm, to be comfortable, to be functioning, to do their homework, whatever it takes, at a lower level, and then those who can afford it above a tariff, above a level, a good subsistence level, would pay more. So that bit I agree with. There is no doubt there's massive inequality, and I think the way to tackle that is not necessarily to hammer down on those who have, but is to try and get those who don't have the educational standards, the health. I think that's the way to do it, is try to give people the opportunities to be the best they can be.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Melissa, Lannery,
Well, fair in fact, Riv and Sean, you are very, very welcome here today. And funny, whenever I think of Bryson, immediately it's always fuel poverty that one thinks in terms of. And it's interesting to hear just how much wider you embrace the whole notion of poverty in every respect. Now, I'm an MLA for West Tyrone. To what extent are you involved in that area? And I know that you mentioned there that you have a presence now in Donegal and that as well. I just live exactly on the Donegal border. But I wonder to what extent you have that presence in West Tyrone, and in particular then to those people who would benefit from your services, how they refer to you, or how do you get in contact with them?
So, in terms of the emergency relief, the presence in West Tyrone will be exactly proportionate with the population. So we'll make absolutely sure and certain of that. We have a heat map that shows the absolute correlation between where we're giving aid to and where the population is. So we do the emergency relief right across Northern Ireland. It's a fair point. We are not, in terms of the depth of services everywhere, we are strongest in Belfast, in the northwest. We have 350 odd staff up, 30, 40, 50 come in Donegal and work up there. We're strong in other parts of the population, but I would say in West Tyrone we're probably fairly weak, and we can't be everywhere, and we don't want to be everywhere. We don't pretend we can do this all ourselves, but what we'd like to try and do is prove that this works, and then spread it and help others to understand what works and contribute that way. We can't be, we're 1,100 people, we can't be everywhere.
I appreciate that, and whenever I use the term West Tyrone, people immediately think in terms of probably a rural constituency, but yet and all at the same time there are really large towns in that area as well too, such as Strabane, the one which I'd actually represent.
Yeah.
So your presence in a town like Strabane or Omagh, for that matter, to what extent are you involved there?
Limited. We'll be much stronger in Fermanagh, we'll be much stronger in Enniskillen. We'll have a big initiative running on trauma that we're putting a lot of money into in Fermanagh. But ultimately, either we would like to be there or have helped others to understand how to end poverty. So a lot of what where we are is kind of an historic accident. I would say that across Northern Ireland we've probably got a bigger reach than any other charity. But unfortunately we can't be, we just can't, I'd be lying to you if I said we could be immediately strong there. We can't. A lot of where we're strong is where the state has funded us to provide specific services, where we have won contracts, where we have worked with the state on whether it's social work or education or whatever it is, and for what we're not strong where you are, and it's going to be difficult for us to be strong in the immediate future unless we get some significant funding.
Well, I asked the question why. If it's state funding and the likes, who's directing you, say, to Fermanagh as opposed to West Tyrone or whatever?
That one came from, we were invited in. People in Fermanagh heard what we were doing in different parts and said, look, can you come in? So if we're happy to talk and see if we can do something. But generally in terms of our voluntary stuff, it's generally where we're invited in. We talk to people who are invited in.
Thanks, Melissa. On our Deputy Chair, Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for your briefing. It's very, very important stuff and very useful for us to hear, I suppose. I just want to go back to your initial remarks, Shane, about around COVID time and going around helping those 5,200 people you helped, and was it 4,000 of those weren't known to yourselves or the state or its agencies, which, quick maths, that's about 80%, that's a high majority there. So how do you, if that's reflective of now as well, how do you identify those people? I know at that stage you're going round doors and just knocking and just stumbling upon them, basically. So how do you identify them now? And at that time you said people were receptive to help because I suppose we were living through all these unknowns through COVID, but there are still huge challenges facing people with the cost of living crisis, and we know that so many families are struggling. So are people still as receptive to help now, in your opinion, or how do you see that?
Generally, where there is intense need, people are at their wits' end, they're more receptive. There is, and the emergency relief scheme is very good because we get to people very quickly, and actually we find that some people, we can get to them faster than ambulances. We find that there are people who are right at the edge or who of health crisis. We discovered an infant baby that was within hours of dying because there was no heat. The child was freezing to death. And we were able to get there and get the child into hospital within 10-15 minutes. There are massive barriers, however, because the people we're working with have been failed by the state or have failed themselves. Doesn't matter. So confidence, fear are massive. We find if in an area it usually takes at least 2 years to work in an area, to build, if we're talking about on a community basis, to build confidence, trust, belief, credibility. And a lot of our trauma work allows us to start to open that up. It's a great question. I don't have a great answer other than to keep trying to do it, keep working out what is effective, keep trying to spread the word. I don't have a panacea for that. It's a brilliant question.
Fair enough. And just on Malaysia's, following on from Malaysia's point, I also represent West Tyrone, and Malaysia's right. It is a largely rural constituency, but there are big towns in it, and people within those big towns will need help as well.
If we could meet and talk about that, and let's see what
absolutely.
What, it'd be good to talk, to understand, and see if there is stuff we can do.
But just in regards to that there as well, it is a largely rural constituency as well. So do you see rural areas having specific kind of barriers for people? And creating kind of more need for people because of the rurality. I'm thinking of those who are digitally disconnected because of where they live rather than their understanding of like using the internet and that kind of thing, but actually physically because of where they live. Do you see increased barriers because of their rurality?
I don't know.
Maybe not yet.
I'd be making up an answer if
oil. To be honest, oil heating in a lot of the rural houses is the issue, because I know Bryson's is electric and gas, but oil, because it's unregulated. Now it's cheap at the minute, but it's a difficulty.
It fluctuates so much.
Well, also lack of public transport and several other many complex issues.
There are complex issues. There's physical issues. The principles are the same. Meet people at their point of need, get them off the edge of the cliff and try and find a formula that will maximise their potential. Are we sophisticated enough? Have we been doing this enough to have a different offering, urban versus rural? No. I mean, I think, although we're 119 years old, on this particular fight of ending poverty, maybe to our shame, we're relative infants. So, and I don't think anybody has this. I've gone around the world looking for solutions, and the question you've asked, I've asked others around the world. So I've spoken to the head of the Red Cross, Médecins Sans Frontières, Red Crescent, UNICEF, Oxfam. Nobody has this cracked. So what we need to do is say it's not acceptable. Keep learning fast, but be determined to end it within a generation.
Thank you for that, Shane, and maybe we will, as a constituency,
yeah,
meet up today.
Please.
And just finally, I want to say I do agree with you that this needs to be a cross-departmental thing, and for everyone to have the same objective at the end of the day. So I think that's a valid point to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Coming of a couple of other indications now, so time's creeping in a wee bit on us, so I've just could ask members to be as concise as they can and in terms of responses. So I've Morris, Andy and Pam. Morris, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks very much for your presentation. And suppose, like a lot of the MLAs in here, I've had the opportunity of both using Bryson and signposting some of our constituents to Bryson. So thank you very much for all that you do. But one thing that really annoys me is the assumption amongst statutory organisations, and even more so now in the health, that everybody has access to the internet, that everybody can use the internet. And it's just not on. I'll give you an example. A man walked, because he couldn't get through to the doctor, no landline, no phone. He walked 1.5 miles to the doctor's surgery. His nearest bus stop's 0.5 mile, so he walked on. And he tried to make an appointment at the receptionist because he couldn't get through on the phone, and it was eating up his credit on his mobile. And he was told, no, you can only have an appointment if you contact the office here or the surgery between 8 o'clock and 8:30. He's left in no man's land. So that, to me, the inability of people to access and understand internet causes an awful lot of problems, especially in people who are not, as Kelly would say, as well off as others.
So in the first year of the pandemic, I think it was about 3,000 people we connected to the internet through tablets, through dongles, and through training. But the problem wasn't just the internet, the problem was their own ability to have the confidence, the literacy, the numeracy to operate it. because we actually made a mistake. We gave out tablets to about 100, 150 people, and then a year later, like, they weren't being used. So I agree with you, but it's part of a bigger thing. It's not just narrowly digital connection in itself. It's the multi bits of it.
Yeah. You also touched upon poverty and housing and education. So thanks very much for your presentation, Chair. That was as brief as I could possibly be.
And I thank you for it, Morris. It was certainly concise. Appreciate it. Andy.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for the presentation, and thanks for all that you do. Like others, I have engaged with Bryson and availed for our constituents of the emergency relief schemes that you've run. In terms of the emergency assistance schemes you mentioned earlier on, Ciaran, around 20% are people that are coming back again for that support. Are you maybe able to give us a bit more of an understanding as to the themes or the reasons why the 20% were coming back, and equally why 80% weren't in need of ongoing support?
Yeah, so when people apply, we try to get help to them within 72 hours. So we have a triage process which identifies those who need one-off help and those who need longer-term help. And typically it's about 18-20% need longer-term help, and that's then backed up when we deduplicate, run the people we've helped year on year against each other. It's about 18-20% need repeat help. Quite often you can have a very simple intervention if the people can't get away from the edge of the cliff themselves, like advice on energy about how do you change supplier, how do you change your tariff. So sometimes it can be very quick, easy fixes. I mean, a good thing is that the majority just need a quick fix there and then, and are able to get away from the edge of the cliff themselves.
Yeah, but were there any particular reasons why people weren't coming back? You know, that they had that one-off support, and obviously you're saying that you're mapping them, and where's their advice and guidance? And I know the Consumer Council, for example, have the very useful tool around tariffs. But again, it's okay giving somebody that, and even I know myself, I've gone through it, and you know, just understanding that and understanding what the best tariff potentially is for yourself is challenging, and I know that from my own point of view. But I'm interested to see, you know, from the schemes that you've ran and obviously the government funding that you've been given, is there anything that we're taking away from that that we can then implement on a more broader scale to try to tackle, in particular, fuel poverty?
I don't think so. I think we can do more research into that, but I don't think so. I think it's mainly individual life circumstances. Lost my job, divorced, in hospital, child ill. It's more personal challenge, stroke tragedy than any systematic thing. Is why people are able to get away from the edge of the cliff.
Okay, and in the form that again, having completed the form, there's that bit, that reason for, you know, requesting support. Was there anything you can share with us around that? Obviously, that doesn't identify individuals, obviously, but there will be a wealth of data and information there around why people were interacting with that support. You'd also mentioned as well about you've gone around the world and you've engaged with many different organisations and agencies. Is there anything that you would suggest that's worth looking at that they've done well around the world around tackling poverty and fuel poverty in particular? And is there any of those models you feel that we're currently taking forward here in Northern Ireland?
So if I hear you right, there's two questions there. One is the reasons people need the funding. We do have that. I don't have that with me. We can get you that. In terms of world best practice, distressingly not. But what is interesting is that there is a really big dissatisfaction with the major aid charities around the world that 95 to 98% of what they spend is on the emergency, and well less than 5% is on the root cause. So it's spent on the emergency shelter, medical, clothing, food. And so when the famine comes again, when the conflict comes again, you're right back to square one or worse. So I think there are going to be two big shifts. So I can't point you to anything, and that's the distressing thing, because that's, you know, what I spoke about public housing, I spoke about social work. We bluntly stole those from North America and from parts of Europe respectively. So we went around looking for solutions, but they're not there. And the two big things are the percentage that's spent emergency versus long term, and secondly, results based. There's the spent money, hand over fist trillions without specific results, and so a lot of it is wasted. a lot of it isn't, there's no good measures of what a good return on investment is, which is why a lot of it goes into corruption, bribery. So so I think over the next 5 years you'll see a big shift, more into root cause and more into being results based.
And picking up on that root cause piece, what do you foresee as, from your experience, as being the fundamental root causes?
Trauma, poor education, poor health, poor ability to gain work. And if we can fix 4 things, it's going to be education, health, employment and income.
Bit of a hypothetical question, just coming back on that. So if DFC were to come to you tomorrow and say, let's develop a scheme to tackle those root causes and those challenges, how would you do it?
We're running a series of pilots. What we would do is keep those pilots, spread the pilots. We've got to prove it. We've got to break the elephant up into bite-sized bits. I don't think you can tackle it all at one. I think you've got to break it up into doable bits. And then we work out what works and spread it like wildfire. So I think it's to have more pilots, but prove it and then spread it.
Sure, I'll leave it there. I can pick up a lot of this.
Thank you, thank you, Andy. And I think it brings us back to something you said at the start around where you're meeting people at the cliff edge. What we need to be doing is finding where the path is and meeting them up the path while they're heading towards the cliff. And that's where an anti-poverty strategy, a proper anti-poverty strategy, could make a difference in that, I would hope. Okay, Pam and then Mark. Pam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for your attendance today at committee. I'm, as an MLA for Southampton, very aware of some of the incredibly good work and support you have given to community within Southampton, in particular in the Newton Abbey area. And actually, Andy asked one of the questions I want to ask, and you've answered that well about the root causes in particular. But you've also clearly identified literacy, numeracy issues such as that, digital access as well as obstacles. So could you just tell me what practical steps you think we should be pressing for at policy level to try to address these issues in order to deal with poverty and with fuel poverty?
A 20-year goal of taking the 75,000 poorest people out of poverty. Have that broken down by 3 years, and have that as top of the agenda for government departments, charities that were joined up going the same way, and hold us all accountable for working it out and getting people out of poverty. If you could do that one thing, it'd be brilliant. I think the issue is ambition, results, joined upness, long term, and if we can get that right, we can actually. It's an issue that isn't orange green. It's an issue that unites us all, and we can enjoy being successful, learning from each other, and taking it to a better place. So I think that one clear vision broken down into numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah, what gets measured gets done. In other words, set the target, and you're right, the target needs to be the ending of poverty. And you're right, it will take numerous years. We're not going to do this overnight, but you work your way back then from that as to how you're going to do that in the bite-sized chunks. That is fundamental. Finally, going to Mark there on Zoom. Go ahead, Mark, please.
Cheers, Chair. I'll be brief as well. You'll be glad to hear. Just like others, just to thank Bryson for the literal lifeline that you guys and your colleagues have provided to the constituents of mine. It's been a great help, but obviously as the chair says, we want to reduce the need for those sort of late interventions and focus on earlier lasting interventions. In terms of causes, and I know you touched there on particular events and stuff like that, we recognise that while the fuel prices, energy prices aren't as crazy as they were a couple of years ago, but there is always the threat, given global events, that they could get back there, and that's a fear that's always on people's mind. But we've seen huge increases in the price of food. So it's in terms of a definition of fuel. More people are in fuel poverty because they've less money to spend on fuel, even though the energy, I suppose, costs aren't as high as they were. Are your colleagues hearing much from people, I suppose, on the coalface on that sort of that cost of living? Cost of living isn't a term that's trendy to use anymore, but it hasn't gone away. You know, that crisis, and is that something you are hearing much of?
We have a food offering, and we help many thousands of people a year on food, and at different times we give out up to, feed up to 3,000 families a week. It's net purse, but we do find that still the biggest demand is on fuel by some distances on energy. That's where people are finding it most difficult. A lot of stuff in food in fuel it's your house, it's your property. On food you can go places, get stuff, you can have family support. So we find by some distance it's the energy is the biggest, but like net it's the same impact on the family.
But I suppose that is that heat or eat in a crux, and it's because people are having to spend more to eat. Yeah. They have less to spend on heat, and I suppose that actually then the cost of that food assistance that you provide must have increased significantly as well, just given the surge in food prices.
Yes and no. For us, whether it's food or fuel, and fuel is much bigger than food, it's meeting people. That's the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the iceberg is very common. The rest of the iceberg is very poor health, poor education, poor employment. So I think whereas it manifests the tip of the iceberg, the root causes are very similar. I don't think there's much difference there. Sorry, I'm maybe not understanding or answering your question. Sorry.
I blame the way I've asked it rather than the way you've answered it. But no, we'll revisit it again maybe. And then just one last thing, and it would be on partnership working and the role that so many and all of us as elected reps, but yourself and so many agencies have to play. It's important that we're working as a team to do so, to combat poverty and ultimately, or ideally, to prevent poverty. What sort of working relationship would you have on the ground with other charities, or would you have specific partnerships in specific geographic locations?
I can't remember the exact numbers, but we would work with, I think it's about 80 or 90 other charities to identify those in greatest need. So I think we have very good relations, but I think it could be much more effective if we go back to what I said. If everybody was trying to end poverty by certain numbers, then we would all be much more tightly aligned. I think sometimes the danger, whether it's government, whether it's business, whether it's charities, is pursuing a range of agendas. If we're going to align the agendas, we'll be. If we can align the mountain we're going up, our agendas will align. Will be much more effective. So I think it's good, but I think it could be miles better.
Okay, thank you.
You create a vision there of people going up a mountain. If they're all going up in a line, they're all supporting and pulling. Whereas if they're all over the mountain,
right, or different mountains,
or different mountains, they're competing or pulling against each other, and through no fault of their own, might I add. But so listen, really interesting discussion. I have to say, really interesting discussion. Very, very current in terms of how this all might feed into the outcome of the consultation on the anti-poverty strategy and what we might see in terms of a redrafted strategy in that regard. I think there's some really useful information there. But thank you for all the work you're doing in terms of policy and assisting us today, and in terms of that very practical and pragmatic support that you're providing in such a accessible way.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we're not perfect. I'm sorry we can't answer all the questions. We're on a journey too, and we will follow up on the information that's been asked for and up in your part of the world. Yeah.
Great.
If perfection was an requirement, we'd all be in trouble.
Thank you very much.
All right, Ciaran, and thank you both. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, members, any other follow-ups there that members want to flag? Kelly?
Chair, we all know how important the impact of poverty is across Northern Ireland. I'm just wondering at this stage, before the executive really has updated its programme for government during the multi-year budget period, could we as a committee write to the executive office to ask for a synchronised priority to end poverty in Northern Ireland to be added in as a key priority for the next programme for government. Or in the next year's programme for government.
Members, any other views on that, or anything members want to explore on that? So you're really asking that we write to propose that a synchronised what? Say it again, Kelly.
A synchronised target to get rid of poverty in Northern Ireland would be a key priority in the programme for government moving forward. We have
is that in terms of advising as a committee that needs to be part of a programme for government, or asking them if they have plans to, and it just not clear what their actual ask is? Coordinated, can we say coordinated rather than synchronised, that a coordinated approach to poverty, is that what you're...
Well, no, I'm just asking them to put it in because it's not in.
That it be included,
you know,
be considered
there is
for
no
inclusion.
In the programme for government rather than any kind of legislative target, or...
Well, if it was in the programme for government, it probably would lead to legislation then.
Right to the TO to ask for
anti-poverty to be a key priority.
Target in the next version of the programme for government?
Well, I don't know when that's coming out. You know, is the current programme for government it until 2027, or is it going to be updated?
Current stroke updated programme for government?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, members content? Okay, members, moving on to agenda item 8, departmental briefing on the climate change action plan. So papers for this agenda are in tabled pack at page 73, and I now would like to welcome the following officials to the meeting. So we're joined by Angus Kerr. Angus is Director of Climate Change Division. Dominic Dorris is Departmental Climate Action Plan. Donna Knowles, Head of Residential Decarbonisation Branch. And David Farry, who is Residential Building Sector NI Climate Action Plan. So Angus, I believe it's yourself that's going to make a brief opening statement, and then we'll come to members' questions, please. Thank you, Angus. Go ahead.
Lovely, thank you. Just get my glasses here. Okay, good morning, chairs and members of the committee. As you know, I'm Angus Kerr, and Director of the Climate Change Division in the department. You've introduced my colleagues already. So listen, thanks for affording us the time to come and update you about the Departmental Climate Change Action Plan today. You've already seen, hopefully, our written brief. But I also want just to take an opportunity today to not just cover the Departmental Climate Change Action Plan, but also touch on wider climate change work that we're doing across the division, and particularly on the residential building sector and the Northern Ireland Draft Climate Action Plan. So it's just to make that distinction actually from the start that we're sort of a stream of work on the departmental climate action, and then also a separate stream on the residential sector of the Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan. So maybe just touching on the departmental climate action plan first. I'll just briefly recap for the committee the steps that led to the publication of the 24-25 action plan, and I think that will be helpful probably for you to understand why the action plan was published and where it fits in relation to the wider work that we're doing across the department. So, I mean, even before the Act came in 2022, the department was already taking steps around climate action. It established a climate change working group back in 2021. And under their guidance produced climate change action plans for the department in 2021 and 2022 respectively. But then in response to the Act itself in 2022, the department established a climate change division, which is the division which I lead on, which has among the wider responsibilities of the division are matters including fuel poverty, residential decarbonisation and climate action that we're talking about now. So with respect to the departmental climate action, the division advises, facilitates and supports the department in delivery against its statutory obligations, particularly under Section 52 of the Climate Change Act. Section 52 is the clause in the Act which requires departments to exercise their functions so far as possible to do so in a manner that is consistent with meeting the emissions targets and carbon budgets flowing from the Act, and to do so in a way that cooperates with other departments. So, however, it remains the responsibility of the business areas themselves within the department and our ALBs to implement and deliver on climate action in line with Section 52. We can't do it for them. They must take responsibility for that. We're there to help, I suppose. It is primarily in this support capacity that I'm speaking to you here today. With the support of the Climate Change Working Group, which I now chair, we developed a 2024-25 Departmental Action Plan, which was published on the 18th of December 2024 and set out 47 actions and initiatives proposed for that year under 3 themes essentially. So firstly, mitigation, which is around what can be done to limit greenhouse gas emissions or to prevent climate change from happening, in a sense, to mitigate. Secondly, around adaptation, in other words, what can be done to make our people and communities and spaces more resilient to the effects of climate change, which no matter what we do are already with us. And then finally, the third area, behavioural change, which is what we can do both individually and collectively to educate ourselves to the challenges that lie ahead and then act accordingly by changing behaviour. So the plan demonstrates the department's leadership and commitment to respond to climate change across the department and our ALBs through how we reduce our impact on the environment, adapt to make our communities more climate resilient, and how we sought to influence and encourage staff to become more climate literate and change behaviour. So the period covered by the 24-25 action plan ended on the 31st of March 2025, and the department wrote to the committee on the 19th of May to advise that of the 47 actions in the plan, 33 were fully completed, 12 were partially completed, and were expected to be completed in this financial year, and 2 were delayed indefinitely. So of the 12 actions that were partially completed, it was proposed that these would be carried forward into the 2025-26, and they are currently on track to be completed by March 26. The actions that were delayed indefinitely were due to a combination of resources and delays with third-party dependencies. I think it's probably also important to highlight for members that incorporating climate change into the work of the department and its ALBs is a relatively new undertaking in a sense, and as such the activities are by their nature more long term, so they don't always lend themselves to the 12-month sort of action plan period, and much of the work remains ongoing. And linked to that is that we are now working on a longer term climate change strategy for the department, which will guide and direct our collective and future efforts in a more proactive way and in a more sort of long-term trajectory. And we've been engaging both within the department and our ALBs on the strategy, and also supported by the working group as well. So that's what we're working on at the moment. So now I'd like to turn to the Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan itself and give you a short just overview of that around the residential sector. The department acts as the sector lead for residential buildings for the Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan. The sector lead is responsible for providing DAERA, who have overall responsibility for the Northern Ireland CAP, with the policies and the proposals which will help to reduce carbon emissions within residential buildings to meet the carbon budget. So the first climate action plan is for the first carbon budget. The residential building sector is currently the 4th largest carbon emitting sector, accounting for about 12% of overall emissions in Northern Ireland in 2022. Emissions in the sector are primarily affected by fuel combustion, essentially for heat and hot water. So we have 13 policies and proposals in the draft CAP. These are grouped around, I suppose, 3 key areas. So the first one is about reducing energy consumption, which includes initiatives such as the current affordable warmth scheme, which the committee will be familiar with, a new replacement fuel poverty scheme as well, which we're calling the Warm Healthy Home scheme, and also the work that the housing executive are doing in their thermal improvement programme. The emphasis on this in this area would be on retrofitting the least energy efficient homes first, and on supporting households in the most need. So the second area then is around low carbon options for heating, and the main initiatives here are switching from oil to gas, and then the Department for Economy's Energy Efficiency Programme and low carbon heat pumps and so on. So the third area is around raising standards, mainly through uplifts of building regulations, which is led by the Department for Finance. So as you can probably tell from that, while the department has overall responsibility for this sector and contributes some of the policies and proposals, we rely heavily on other departments, including the Department for Economy, Finance, and also on DAERA themselves to contribute the policies. The department also has a role in supporting DAERA in developing some of the other aspects of the Northern Ireland CAP beyond just the residential sector, so behaviour change, just transition, which is important for our sector in particular, green skills, and also complying with the other requirements of the Act around nature-based solutions, protecting biodiversity, carbon capture, and so on. The list is long in the Act. Quantification of emissions, quantification of emission reductions for policies and proposals included in the CAP have been finalised, and estimates are that the first draft Northern Ireland CAP will meet the 2027 carbon budget. However, the trajectory to achieve the subsequent carbon budgets, the 2040 target, carbon budget 2 and 3 and so on, and ultimately getting to net zero in 2050 are much more challenging and will in the future require significant policy development, investment and behaviour change going forward. We've recently commissioned a baseline analysis followed by scientific modelling estimates of emission reductions in the residential sector up to 2050 and have received an initial report on this. This will provide us with a high level evidence base to inform future policy decisions to meet future carbon budgets and targets, and the development of a longer term residential decarbonisation strategy and roadmap right through to 2050. So as you'll be aware that the first draft Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan was published on the 17th of June as part of a 16-week public consultation process. So the consultation actually closes in about a week's time on the 8th of October. There have been a number of public consultation events across Northern Ireland which have been led by DAERA and other sector departments over the summer and early autumn. And we held our own sector-specific residential sector event on the 24th of September, just last week, which was very successful and it had really good attendance. So the Minister has made it very clear that the transition to low-carbon homes will put people first and will be a just transition, which will not increase bills for low-income households. To that end, as the committee is aware, and we've briefed you previously on this, we're producing a fuel poverty strategy with an ambitious vision of a warm, healthy home for everyone. This strategy will address fuel poverty and will also have positive implications for public health and well-being. One of the key objectives of the fuel poverty strategy is to make homes more energy efficient, and both it and the Northern Ireland Climate Action Plan proposes an expanded, more ambitious fuel poverty energy efficiency scheme, which we are calling the Warm Healthy Homes Scheme, and which will replace the Affordable Warmth Scheme when it comes to an end. So that's a brief overview. Thank you for giving me the time and the opportunity to do that. And we're happy to do our best to answer any questions that you have today at the briefing. One thing maybe just to bear in mind in respect of the sort of the many distinct business areas or ALBs mentioned in the Departmental Climate Action Plan, we might not have all the knowledge and expertise within those various business areas for detailed questions, but we'll certainly do our best, and if we need to, we can always go back to the business areas and report back to yourselves. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Angus, and very much appreciate that. So the first question is, there's a wee bit of a discrepancy between what you've told us there and some of what was provided to us in writing. I'm not going to dwell on that, but you had said there was 12 partially and 2 delayed, and we had 11 partially and 3 delayed. But I suppose I'm content just to focus on the substance rather than in relation to that difference. But taking the 2 that you mentioned in your briefing there, what are those 2 that are indefinitely delayed? What are the causes of those delays, and what steps is the department taking to remedy them, and when do you expect to see them brought forward?
Yeah. I think the discrepancy, just to clarify that, is based originally when we first completed the assessment at the end of the period of that Climate Action Plan, there were 3, but actually now there's only 2. So that's probably where that discrepancy has appeared. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So the 2 that are delayed, the first one is one around our Belfast Regeneration Division within the department, and they are working with Belfast City Council to plant 18,000 trees on Department's land in the Collin area of Poleglass, Dunmurry, as part of the Belfast 1 Million Trees Initiative to 31st of March 2025. And the issue there has been that the council are just a bit behind, I think, in progressing that initiative, and that we're waiting further communication from the council. But at present, there's no commencement. There's no date for the commencement of that planting. But it's not being dropped. It's something that we I think that we want to do, but there's just a delay with the council. And then the second area of delay was Historic Environment Division. So the action there was by the 31st of March 2025 to utilise hazard mapping and develop vulnerability scoring to create a priority list of state care sites deemed to be at high risk from the impacts of climate change. So it's around a climate adaptation thing. It's really good work. It's an important thing to do, but unfortunately the minute it's delayed just due to resource availability and completing the task, but it's hopefully something that we can continue to look at as we develop the strategy and the future action plans with HED.
Okay, thanks for that. And the second one from me then, before I come to members, is around sort of geographic priorities. So I'm wondering, in your view, where do you think the department should concentrate its early decarbonisation interventions? Should it be linked to specific social housing tenures? Should it be rural versus urban? And we're just after hearing from Bryson, those in the deepest fuel poverty. So, and very conscious of the need to achieve both emissions, and you've mentioned just transition, both emissions to be addressed and also social justice goals. So where do you think that the initial stages should take us?
It's a very good question, because there obviously is a balance there between those kind of two objectives where you're trying to cut emissions and also reduce fuel poverty. And I suppose the approach that we've taken in the work that we're doing to begin to develop the proposals which are coming forward, so there's already the existing policies there like affordable warmth, which are focused very much on need. But the new scheme that we're working on in this department will need to balance that between need. It'll obviously still be focused on those who need the help the most, but it will also be trying through the measures that we'll be offering in this scheme to also reduce emissions through both the energy efficiency and sort of insulation measures that will be in there, but also through some use of renewable technologies and low carbon heat. The Minister's been very clear with us that he doesn't want, bringing forward these sorts of measures to put people's bills up. So that's going to be the balance for us in the test, and that's part of the reason why we've developed that sort of model I talked about earlier, which allows you to be able to sort of input in current sort of fuel prices across the different fuels and get a sense of what impact introducing different measures to different types of tenures will have on homes. We didn't really have that until we got this model, so that will allow us to test that. It'll also allow us to test actually how much emissions savings do you get when you put in different measures to different types of homes. It's very complicated because with so many different tenures and with so many different types of houses, and then there's the different measures that you can use on the houses, but the overall objective is to get that balance right.
Yeah, and I suppose we have and we often discuss the need for joined up inter-departmental and cross-departmental working. In a department like communities, it's also clearly within the department there needs to be joined up thinking and the measures. So I'm thinking here in terms of the impact we could bring to the anti-poverty strategy around fuel poverty and all of that. So it's important that as well as cross-departmental, inter-departmental inside that department, there's joined up thinking. So thank you for that. I'm going to go then to members, so I'm coming first to Kelly and then Pam. Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you all. Bear with me because this is one of my babies. Can I just check, within this residential part of the Climate Action Plan, does it include housing of all tenures? So private, social, everything. So my concern was when I saw the comment or the questions within the fuel poverty strategy, we weren't really thinking wider. So absolutely agree that people who are vulnerable and don't have a lot of income, that their homes, the fuel poverty that they suffer is horrendous. But when you look at the bigger picture of an area, there was no discussion of a place-based approach. It was only based on individuals. My concern is that cross-departmental working to help you guys. I'm not seeing anything coming out of economy about encouraging banks for green mortgages, for retrofitting. I've spoken to a housing executive about rural homes and no intention to put, for instance, solar panels on certain rural areas. I'm not seeing this joined up approach that will actually bring forward what we're trying to achieve with climate action, but do it in the most cost effective way. So how, like for instance, has there been any approach to the multi-year budget on a cross-departmental submission so that your objectives can be achieved because everybody's coming with you with funding on that?
Yes, thanks, Kelly. There's a lot in that. No. So I mean, it's fine. It's touching on the complexities that we're dealing with in this area, I suppose. But so the climate action plan is cross tenure. It is all tenure. So it's very challenging. It's like 800,000 odd homes in Northern Ireland, and we have to try and get them decarbonised. To meet the net zero target in 2050. Very challenging, but it's all tenures. Obviously, the fuel poverty strategy is really focusing in on those social housing and households where you've got low incomes. So the joined up issue, I suppose, you mentioned is key. And I suppose, like, I've been working in different parts of government now for 30 years, and I can absolutely 100% tell you this is the most joined up I've ever seen working, because the very nature of the Climate Act, A, it sort of legislatively requires joined up working, and B, there's so many different sectors, and all the sectors are led by different departments. So you've got DAERA holding the ring, I suppose, but then you've got all the different departments regularly attending different sort of strategic and departmental and sector leads meetings, talking about all these interdependencies. As we begin to electrify homes, what happens if electricity costs are too high? So that's a conversation with DFE. What happens if electricity isn't decarbonised? So it's actually, yes, we're electrifying homes or vehicles on the transport side, but actually we're still coal-fired power stations and so on. So the actual, the emissions are still high. So all those interdependencies are there to talk about. At official level, we've set up kind of what we call the Residential Decarbonisation Coordination Group. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically bringing everyone together who's involved in residential sector and decarbonising the residential sector, from DFE, utility regulator, Department of Finance, DAERA, housing executive, all into sort of one room, which meets, I think it's every 2 months it actually meets. And again, there's subgroups on it, for example, to give you a sense of the real depth of kind of joined up working here. So, we're working on a new affordable warmth scheme, which we're calling the Warm Healthy Home Scheme. DFE are working on schemes, broader schemes for the able to pay tenures and so on energy efficiency and low carbon heat, heat pumps. So they did consult on that recently. And so we have subgroup underneath the main group where they're actually sitting down together and saying, if we're going to have a new scheme for low-income households, it needs to be the same standards, the same qualities, and the same issues, the same redress if something goes wrong, as you would have for the able-to-pay schemes that DFE are sort of leading on. So there has been a lot of joined up working, and the multi-year budget point. I mean, yes, that. The big issue here is getting funding and investment into all of these schemes as we bring them forward. The new schemes haven't come forward yet. They're coming in just at the end of the carbon budget, so they are mentioned in the climate action plan, but they're not in place yet. And we recognise they need to be ambitious and there needs to be funding for them, but and ideally multi-year funding. But at the moment, as you know, it's year by year. Until the executive sort of moves on to that sort of approach.
There's a motion coming up next week in the House, and this gets to a bugbear of mine, that we are now looking at a housing supply strategy for homes that will be built to building regulations that were appropriate for 10 to 15 years ago. So we're not actually building efficient homes. Now, there's efficiencies built into those homes because nobody wants to build a bad home, but we're not building to a standard that those that can afford to are able to. So I'm just wondering, is there anything happening about the design of homes that we can actually ensure that what we build is good for the future, not good for the past?
Absolutely. One of the main policies and proposals within the draft climate action plan are improving building regulations. That's the responsibility of the Department of Finance. So they have in there the proposals to uplift building regulations that are going through the executive at the moment, plus then future phases of uplift, which will require even more stringent standards of new build. I would love it to come forward a little bit more quickly. We have these conversations with DOF all the time. They are doing their best. They've bringing it forward, I suppose, in the wings of the work that's going on in GB. They're following the standards that they have introduced, and I think that makes sense because they're picking up on the lessons learned as they go forward with that. But the ultimate aim is that eventually the standards will be there to make sure that we don't end up in a situation of building new homes that actually then in the future need to be retrofit. So, absolutely, that's
but as part of that, feedback I've had from finance and infrastructure is, well, tell us what you want in the building regs. And to be honest, we could picture a house of what we need it to do and to look like and to move forward with. Is there any work happening on that design of a home with whoever within the department?
The nature of the building regs and what the building regs will require is discussed at that residential decarbonisation group I've talked about. So they're quite complex, and there's guys there from DOF who are really knowledgeable in building regs and how they work. They work on the basis of setting standards for energy efficiency for a home. They don't sort of say you can't have this in your home or you can't have that in your home. So the way they get to where we need to be is by raising those standards of energy efficiency to the point that eventually the only way you can really achieve it is by having absolutely first class insulation and low carbon heat.
Which leads me on to my next question about the planned new affordable warmth. In the south, we've seen how they have gone from the top-down approach for the house. So you've got your insulation in your roof, your walls, your windows. You get to that stage and the very last thing you go for is a heat pump because you have to be airtight and so on. Is the affordable warmth going to take that type of approach where we're encouraging people to take a top-down approach and make up? Because you could get to EPC rating A with a load of solar panels, but you might have the breeziest house in the world. Are we looking that way?
Yeah, we're still in the policy development phase of the new Warm Healthy Homes scheme, and we will be doing a consultation on that later in the year, so we'll definitely come back and talk to you about that. But that's the way our thinking is. It's a whole house approach, and it's fabric first, so that the homes are ready for heat pumps. And also it's very much this point that we talked about earlier, that Colin had raised about affordability as well, because at the minute electricity is expensive. It's probably the most expensive form of energy in Northern Ireland at the moment. That might change. Oil is cheaper. It's unregulated. That might change as well. It all depends on things beyond our control. But we need to make sure that where we are bringing those forward, particularly in low-income households, that they're not going to put people's bills up. So that's when you're into solar panels and batteries as well, possibly with that, because that's a way of being able to keep the cost down.
I know I was speaking to a company recently, Chair, fabulous, who are fitting electric systems into homes and putting the battery in instead of putting it into the grid. You keep it at your own home. Yeah. No, I'm a geek on this. I'll be speaking on the motion next week, and part of that drive is to stop planners from turning down heat pumps and solar panels at the moment, which is happening, and to make sure that all new builds are for the future, not for the past. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, and we're very lucky in my own constituency. The Southwest College, that new build is passive, built to passive standards, and there's a company there talking. And some of these, like this is the tragedy of it. Some of these solutions are not more expensive. There's almost an association that they must be expensive. They're not necessarily. They can be very cost effective now and very cost efficient in terms of fuel efficiency and all of that, and again how that links in with poverty. And I agree with Kelly, like we should be looking at building houses for the next suitable for the next 15-20 years, and we need to make sure building standards are keeping abreast in what's a rapidly changing technologies and climate. We need to make sure we're nimble enough to get those into the standards and into the homes. So thank you, agree with that. Pam, go ahead please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation today, and bear with me, new to this committee on the subject, but it's all very interesting, all very good. But given the last presentation we've just had from Bryson, and really following on from Kelly's point too, in terms of the cross-departmental piece, it's very clear that although clearly lots of money is needed, and there's never enough money to do all the things that we need and want to do, but what work is going on, or what work's being planned with other departments to ensure that that we really meet those education and skills barriers that have been highlighted, such as literacy and numeracy, digital access, and even confidence issues, because we heard from Bryson about how they learned about handing out tablets, but actually a year later they discovered some of the equipment fabulous but hadn't been used. Why is that, and how do we get to those root causes of those issues? And the other question I want to ask you was around, you know, how concerned the department is about delivering on net zero targets, and how realistic is that? And I do welcome that the Minister is going with the just transition to make sure we don't overburden people on the ground. But how concerned are you about the reality of meeting those targets, and what are the barriers there to achieving the net zero target?
Okay, no, thank you. So on the first point around the sort of the confidence issues and the issues with low-income households and vulnerable households and so on, that's very much in the territory of the work we're doing on the fuel poverty strategy. So we've done a lot of engagement actually to inform the strategy. Where we are with that strategy at the moment is that we're just finalising it. We've had the public consultation. We're going to present it to the Minister this month, and then it'll go to the executive before the end of the year. That's the target on that. But that's one of the issues that we've been looking at very carefully in the fuel poverty strategy. So we did lots of focus groups. We went all across Northern Ireland. We talked to people in fuel poverty. It was really, for me, very kind of sort of sobering sort of thing to do, because I don't think I really was aware of the level of fuel poverty that there is and the issues that are facing some families around, you know, spending money on heating their homes versus other pressures that they have. So it's very much at the heart of that. And what we're doing is in that there will be proposals, and we've consulted on them already, around that sort of hand-holding, advice and guidance piece for homes whenever they do come into sort of attention of sort of statutory agencies, maybe nothing to do with fuel poverty, but you know, whether it's medical issues or debt advice or whatever, that there's sufficient ability to be able to transfer those people to where the help is for the fuel poverty issues. So that's the first thing. The second thing then is around the sort of advice and guidance and help that you've highlighted. Even when you get help, you know, are they able to sort of work that? Is it effective? Is it causing problems actually because it's not being done effectively? So we have in there the idea of a one-stop shop, where you can get that advice and you can get the assistance with delivery as well around the scheme itself and the work that will be being done, and then also the hand-holding and the kind of aftercare, if you like. What if something goes wrong? Is it working effectively, and so on? So those are issues that we're really attuned to, and we're trying to deal with through that fuel poverty strategy. And there are also issues that we're looking at in the Warm Healthy Homes scheme itself. The fuel poverty strategy is obviously quite strategic. The scheme is, if you like, an operational kind of manifestation of it, if you like. So it's something that we are looking at in that. And concerned about net zero by 2050. I'm probably not going to be in this job at that point in time. I am concerned about that. I think it's hugely challenging. It really is. We're hitting the targets we need to hit for the first carbon budget by 2027, 33% reduction in emissions. It gets really more difficult and more difficult as you go into carbon budget 2, carbon budget 3 and so on, as you work your way through there. So that's why we're doing the work on sort of a more long-term plan about how we actually get to 2050. There's been so much work done on just trying to hit the target for this carbon budget across us and the other departments as well, but the focus is now being lifted up to look at more long-term future, and it will be very challenging. There's just no other way of saying that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you. And I do want to say I think that's a really good example of a great discussion around a very, very important area, and it's very clear that members of the committee have a particular expertise and passion and interest, and it also links into so much else of what the committee are looking at. You had said there that the strategy is going to the Minister, then Executive. You didn't mention when it's coming to committee, so when is that strategy coming to this committee?
Well, I mean, we've already given you a briefing on the strategy, and it'll go to the committee as we really we'll put it to the Minister, and the Minister will essentially decide when it comes to the committee.
Because the committee would welcome the opportunity to advise and assist, and that is our role, and it's clearly a key area. And I know there are members around this table who have invested a lot of their professional time into this, and I think we certainly would be keen to engage further in that discussion. Kelly, briefly, please.
Just on that, Chair, I'm just wondering. Obviously, we're coming up to a multi-year budget. Will this be in time to be included appropriately within that multi-year budget across all the departments that are necessary and for communities?
Well, I mean, it is a longer term strategy. It's a 10-year strategy, the fuel poverty strategy. So if the Executive agree it, as we hope at the end of the year, it will then factor into the budget arrangements which are in place at that time, which hopefully are multi-year budgets.
I'm just thinking because the departments are already putting their figures forward, and we're expecting sort of December to see that. I'm just wondering if that end of year rather than March end of year.
Well, yeah, it'll be the financial year, obviously. So it's a long-term strategy. So it'll be looking at probably the next financial year, if assuming the budget, assuming the Executive agree it, at the end of the year.
Okay. Well, listen, Angus, Donna, David, and Dominic, thank you very much. This is one that is a really important piece of work, I have to say, in a department and in a committee which is dealing with a lot of things. This one should not, the importance and the potential significance of this should not be underestimated. So thank you for your work. I thank you for your engagement with committee members today, and we look forward to further engaging with you around this work.
Thank you. We do too. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, members, any follow-up action members wish to draw out at this point? Yeah, I'm coming to that one. Yes, Morris, go ahead.
Will be possibly ask the department for a quantitative feedback on our climate action plan. What will it have on the world stage, and what will the world stage have on us? I'm worried that we're doing all we can, and I'm all for it, by the way, especially in the environmental side of things and tree planting. I'm just worried that we're doing everything we can in this wee small part of the world, whereas in other parts of the world they're building coal-powered power stations hand over fist. Mm-hmm. So there's a bigger stage out there. We need to find out what our impact will be in that bigger stage, if anything. And I think it's very, very small.
Yeah, it's valid, although I'm conscious we're struggling to do the work we have without taking on the global problem. But you're right. I'm not dismissing the importance of the query. Are members content that we would? Is it like a comparative analysis you're looking for, or sorry?
What are we
is there
trying
any
to achieve?
Is there any knowledge of the quantitative impact?
Yeah.
Is that
what we're hoping to save in carbon footprint by 2050 compared to what the growth of the world is going to be in 2050.
Well, tough way.
There's a reason why oil's low at the moment.
No need for bad language.
As someone once said, think global, act local. So, but anyway, okay, go ahead, Pam.
Yeah, just to support that suggestion, but it should also be following up in terms of the Belfast City Council piece around the tree planting. And the more specifics of what it seems.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not that anything's easy, but it seems like a kind of a strange one, not to be
directly to Belfast City Council,
yeah, if that's appropriate
for the reason for the delay.
I think that would be good.
Yeah.
And planting targets, okay.
Yeah, and the historic environment one is worth watching as well, because there's a duty on us to protect that historic environment. We're aware there's damage being potentially done, and we're not on top of that. Go ahead, Kelly.
As Chair, on that one, I had written to the Historical Environment Division to ask for a building in my constituency to be added, because it's wrecked, to be honest, and they're not doing anything. My concern still is that our Historical Environment Division has no teeth. So so what if a building's fallen apart? What are they going to do about it? Because they're not taking legal action against some of these private owners. Can we maybe just ask them to have a clarification of what actually they can do if a building is falling into ruin or disrepair? Because I'm very disappointed by their actions so far. You know, they talk about, and they've got all these lists. Now, hopefully they will be adding my concern onto the lists, but they're not going to update that list until months away. But I don't get what they're doing.
Get an update on that if members are content. Yeah.
When they add in whether or not the dilapidation bill will make any difference to their power teeth?
Yeah, well, we can ask them. I don't think it does, because this is not necessarily buildings that would all be in towns or be at threat of falling on somebody, but they don't seem to have any legal powers. It's very confusing, because I thought they did.
Yeah, and maybe some examples of what powers or actions have been taken, because maybe there's also a lack of awareness around powers that have been used and could act as a deterrent effect if there's more. But I fear you're right that there's very little, but if there is something, then I think it'd be good to hear that as well.
There also, Chair, would need to factor that in, that the division itself is a barrier to fixing up properties because of the demands they put upon the owner. And it's not, they're unreasonable. I know a man who took over a listed building in Coleraine, and his bill is 3 times what it was in his estimate, and he has done a really, really good job, but it was very expensive to apply with the regulations. So there's 2 sides to that there we need to maybe explore.
Okay.
Save a building or lose a building because it's too expensive.
Yeah. You content, Clerk?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, members, so with your agreement, I propose maybe take a short comfort break there, and we'll come back at 12 o'clock. We'll take a 5-minute break and come back to resume at agenda item 9. Thank you. And could we ask for broadcasting to be suspended?
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
Bridging and heat pumps and stuff, so Satanta Construction in Marfeld. Fantastic. You can bore all day.
There's loads of them out there.
£175,000 timber frame house, fully passive, fabulous.
Was she confirmed open?
Running
Okay.
costs for nothing.
Okay, members, thank you. So that's us back into broadcasting and resuming our meeting at agenda item 9. So we're now taking a briefing by the Forum for Better Homes, NI, on housing decarbonisation. The briefing paper for the agenda item, folks, is at page 81 of your table papers, and you have also been provided with a report on the route to low carbon homes at page 365 of your main pack. So I'm now delighted to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Martin Haran, who's a Professor of Real Estate in Ulster University, John Sloan, and John is Executive Director of Development and New Business, Clonmel Housing, Gavin McGuire, who's Director of the Federation of Master Builders, and Ciaran Fox, who's Director, Royal Society of Architects. So, Martin, I think it's yourself we're going back to for some brief opening remarks, and then we'll get to questions from members. Thank you, Martin.
Very much, Chair. I'll just start very, very quickly by introducing sort of what the Forum for Better Homes in Northern Ireland is. It's a sort of departmental, cross-sectoral group. It was established in 2018, so we've got representatives from the private construction sector. We've got a number of housing associations involved in there as well, and we've also got a number of funders and financiers that are involved in financing the construction and the housing sector within Northern Ireland, and it's all facilitated by the Lloyds Banking Group, just for context in terms of perspective as to where we come from. The Forum appreciates very much the opportunity to speak with the committee today, and we will hopefully get into the discussion around what the key issues and challenges are. You have been provided with our Forum report on sort of the decarbonisation strategy and the direction of travel for the new foundations and the route to low carbon homes. We have approached this, as I said, from a cross-stakeholder representation and representation of the group. And I think the key thing, I suppose, as a forum is we're very much keen to work with government and with policymakers to try and find solutions. We're very, very mindful of the scale of the challenge, both within the new build sector, but particularly within the retrofit sector. And we've making sort of a series of recommendations. We've undertaken a lot of research. We've gone out and spoken to a lot of stakeholders around what are those challenges, what are those barriers to upscaling of retrofit. And certainly there's copies of the report is available publicly online and hopefully have been shared with you in advance. From the work we've done to date, we've identified, I suppose, a number of key challenges, and in our recommendations we've advocated this need for the development of a roadmap. Obviously, in the absence of funding for retrofit specifically, there are a number of challenges and barriers that need to be overcome to mobilise. And I suppose culturally as well, we've got to this sort of hiatus where particularly the private homeowners, there's not really a level of support or commitment. So even homeowners that are bought into it may not necessarily move forward because there's a lack of sort of consensus. I suppose the other thing we identified as well is there's a lack of, I suppose, credible, robust and partial information for homeowners to actually get. And in our report we advocate this ideology of a one-stop shop. The one-stop shop ideology combined with the identification of what we call an accredited supplier framework. So I think in the context of Northern Ireland and in terms of the retrofit challenge, whilst we're all waiting on funding being made available, one of the things we talked about as a forum is, are we actually ready? So if the magic sort of money tap was turned on, are we as a society and are we as a sector ready to facilitate the retrofitting of homes in Northern Ireland? And the reality is we're not. We don't necessarily have an evidence base to support a structured, systematic and effective and impactful rollout of retrofit. Invariably, when money comes into a system for something like this, if there's not that preparatory works undertaken, that's generally where we see problems, whereby you get unscrupulous suppliers, unaccredited suppliers, and that only compounds the problem in terms of, giving assurances to homeowners and to housing associations, etc. Can they move forward with this? And then you have substandard, poor quality retrofit solutions as a result. So we feel that there's a lot of work, preparatory work, that could be undertaken. Whilst funding is not necessarily immediately available, we need to be prepared. We need to have that evidence base to support what is the most structured, what is the most efficient, what is the most effective retrofit strategy, both at the macro level in terms of like the social housing sector, but also then getting right down to the nitty-gritty of the individual components of housing, whether that be a fabric first approach or whether that be a more technical approach. We talked as a forum as well about, with the limited money we have, how do we optimise impact, both from an environmental but also from a societal point of view? There's a lot of talk about the fuel poverty strategy. There's a lot of vulnerable people in our housing stock. We've got, yes, a lot of our new build stock is on a par or even superior to what's been built in other jurisdictions, but we do have a lot of poor quality performing energy stock, and we're not necessarily getting to those people that are most vulnerable as a consequence of that and sort of the fuel strategy. In our report as well, we've set out a number of sort of recommendations as to how we feel the rollout and upscaling of retrofit could be achieved. There's a number of challenges, as I said, for the sector in terms of skills, in terms of finance, but we don't think those are insurmountable. But we do think that there's a requirement for an orderly and structured upscaling of retrofit in Northern Ireland, and to mobilise ourselves and to get ready for that. The skills piece, we think, we do need to try and retain both upskill and upscale. I don't think we're in a position at this moment in time to actually deliver retrofit or retrofit challenges, and I think we haven't really exploited or leveraged the opportunity from an economic point of view in terms of the new skills that are needed there, the new careers that can be carved out there. So we're not exploiting that as a potential economic driver or economic multiplier as well. And obviously then there's the environmental targets that we are working towards. I think we need more continuity, consistency, and what that actually means in terms of the roadmap for the residential sector. We all know the numbers in terms of what the residential sector contributes in terms of carbon emissions. But the reality is, 50-60% of our homes are already in situ. So we do have a massive retrofit programme to be undertaken. Building regulations and the scale of ambition there is something we also have talked about, and how we factor in those costs. We talked about, well, what are we doing as a society? What is Northern Ireland doing as a regional economy in terms of retrofit, and how can we get the most traction? And I think from the members of the forum and the discussion, as I said, we've got a cross-stakeholder representation. The ideology is that the impact can be most attained through the social housing sector. They're probably much further advanced, but we do need to be able to show a pipeline of work, because I think that pipeline of work, assurances and commitments to policies and targets, is what's probably required in terms of getting the investment in to the construction sector to actually facilitate that upscaling. So that's kind of in terms of where we're at the minute in terms of the key recommendations, and as I said, we're very happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for the material provided to committee. That's very, very useful. I am struck by the cross-disciplinary pollination of that you have recognised, because it's an issue we're constantly struggling with around cross-departmental, cross-sector, all of those challenges. So it's very refreshing to see a group of people in front of us from a range of disciplines putting together a coherent kind of paper in relation to that. So thank you for that. I suppose then, well, first of all, just to ask, you mentioned the fuel poverty strategy, have you had any kind of formal engagement with the development of that fuel poverty strategy? Have you contributed in any way to that?
We did feed into that initially. We have subsequent follow-up meetings with with the department regarding that as well. We've got a number of concerns, I suppose, particularly around the private rented sector. We also do a lot of work in the university around, I suppose, the private rented sector, the costs there. We're seeing huge issues around, unaffordability within that private rented sector. We're seeing that sector actually shrinking year on year. We've historically gone back to 1982 to create, a private rental index, but we're seeing the size of that sector actually consolidate year on year. More and more sort of landlords are moving out to do short-term lets. They're being forced out through policy, but the most vulnerable members of our society are probably resident in that, because we're not building enough social houses. A lot of what conventionally would have been social housing tenants are being forced into that private rented sector. The quality of stock there is much inferior from an energy efficiency point of view. So there's a lot of stuff, we did feed into it initially, Chair, but I think there's a lot of stuff we would like to contribute further to that in terms of trying to find a balanced, that going back to the point of just transition, what is equitable and what is fair, because I suppose we need to be very, very careful here that we're not in what's already a housing crisis, and a housing crisis within a crisis in terms of the private rented sector, that we're not forcing more and more housing provision in that sector out, because we haven't already got an acute problem there.
Yeah, and you have. So just can I also check? Have you seen any iterations then of that strategy coming along where you have either seen part of your influence feeding into the strategy, or being concerned at a lack of, or have you not had that opportunity to kind of review how your input has fed into the strategy itself?
I'll maybe take that. Obviously, from a social housing provider, we do watch very closely what is coming out, because we think it's about future-proofing what and how we're going to be able to do things as we move forward. So I suppose the very short answer there would be no, not yet, because we haven't seen anything. Our various individual representative bodies also fed into that. So we fed in as a sector, we feed in individually, but we haven't actually seen anything. And I think that is a really valid point. it's what happens after you do. You take the time to put that in from a, I'm going to call it a practitioner's lens as opposed to a policy lens, because we're trying to bring that real life lived experience. We're connected to our customers. They're the ones driving that. We see how fuel poverty is impacting through, you know, the types of things that customers come to us to make use of our hardship fund, for example, to use. And a lot of that is about paying energy bills as it goes up. We're trying to work with energy providers through effective procurement to try to secure bulk buying so that it becomes a cheaper output for our customers so that they have that level of disposable income. But it's how do we share that then so that policy reflects that it one size doesn't fit all, and delivering on a strategy doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually going to translate into the reality for those people on the ground who it's intended to benefit. And we're very supportive of having that. We need a fuel poverty strategy, but I think there is perhaps a gap about just that, I suppose, golden thread of circling it back round and talking to practitioners before strategies are launched.
Yeah, because a lot of that fuel poverty starts from the fabric of the home, and we've touched upon that. We've also, I suppose, in the context of today's broader discussion with all of the other organisations, we have touched upon financial pressures within the department, but we're acutely aware that there is, I think we're probably all agreed, there is aware for a huge need for a large-scale retrofit programme to bring some of this in line. You've touched there upon the housing associations and the private sector, which were going to be part of my question. You've already addressed that. The other element of my question was, what role do you see for local councils in relation to this? And as we're talking, it occurs to me that this is potentially something on an all-island basis. Potentially we should be looking at shared island funding, or like, I wonder, have you any experience of that? Do you think it might be relevant to that, or is that potentially one part of a solution?
Certainly there's a lot to be learnt from what's happening in the Republic of Ireland. I think everybody here who is interested in retrofit and improving the energy performance of homes looks at the twin track approach on the island, and it's I don't think it's wrong to say that Northern Ireland falls further and further behind in two very particular ways. One are building regulations which set the standard at which you must build to new, and when you're refurbishing, that they're the two things. So we had an increase in June 2022, at which point we were told the next change is coming fast on its heels. It was originally intended for 23-24. Here we are going towards 26, and we still haven't seen not even the next, the consultation come out on what that will be. So very concerned about that pace in terms of the building control or building regulations. And the other side, which is equally important, is funding. The funding available for retrofit in the Republic of Ireland is at a different level. They're even running a really important pilot at the moment, looking specifically at how to deal with the difficult to retrofit buildings, older buildings, typically solid wall. And one thing I think it's important always in all of this to say is each building is different. There's different challenges, and the idea of a sort of one-size-fits-all approach simply doesn't work, because at the heart of all this, I think it's really important to put the health of the occupant, the importance of ensuring good indoor air quality, the likelihood of mould with poor retrofit is enormous, and also actually the fabric degradation. And what I mean by that is basically damaging your building, damaging timbers as a result of poor quality retrofit. So I would put a really big emphasis on good design and quality control. Someone doing the work should not be marking their own homework. That's one of the lessons I think we've learned from other schemes all across the world.
Chair, if I just may add to that as well, just you asked the question about local authorities and the role.
Yep.
We've worked with a lot of local authorities in terms of their local development plan. I think there's been an opportunity really missed there. There's been remiss in terms of the amount of, I suppose, the absence of any recognition or appreciation of retrofit or decarbonisation of homes within local development plans here across Northern Ireland. It's not just one local authority, we've worked with multiple, and I think it's remiss that it's not a key and fundamental component of the local development plan model. We're also fixated on this ideology of the fabric of the home, but we're still building houses all over the place. So the carbon intensity of the home may be much more efficient, but we're creating a lifestyle and a culture where the offsetting of the carbon is not really balanced out. And the big thing we talked about, and Ciaran touched on it there, but the upgrading of building regs in 2022, it's massively concerning the amount of stock that is pushed through the planning system that's going to be built to old regs. Even though it'll be new stock, it'll be built to old regs, so it'll be building up the retrofit costs of the future within a 5 to 7 year time frame in order to comply with the new standards in terms of decarbonisation. So there needs to be a much more holistic approach to this, and I think the local authorities have more, and certainly could be doing more in terms of the development plans to push this.
Just one thing to add on that, on Belfast City Council, they are starting a process looking at district heat, particularly low carbon heat. And I think whilst naturally people's minds turn to the building itself and how you can make it more energy efficient, sometimes the most intelligent response is to say, how do we lower the input cost and the carbon cost of the heat? And if you can do that, therefore you don't have to invest as much into the house itself, and particularly for certain areas where it's going to be very difficult or very expensive to retrofit, that low carbon, lower cost heat option is something that needs to be explored.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, Chair,
Yeah.
just to give a wee bit of context too, Ciaran mentioned about Belfast City Council. To their credit, they established the first UK-based city retrofit hub, which happened, I think, back probably around 3 years ago. So that has provided quite a good amount of interaction for stakeholders. One of the interesting things that they brought forward was the interest in private investment, perhaps potentially, in seeing perhaps an upgrade in terms of what's happening. And there is a lot of shared practice across the other devolved nations as well in terms of what's happening around retrofit. So whilst Northern Ireland is a little bit behind, if that's been kind to us, there's no need for us to keep the handbrake on forever. But I think what we can do is we can learn from some of the examples of where other regions have perhaps tried and trialed some of these issues, and maybe learn a little bit from the structure of what hasn't worked to develop a scheme which actually is more positive and makes better use of resources. So that shared information is certainly available through ourselves for any of the members who feel they would like to have that as well.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. So I'm going to go first of all in this instance to our Deputy Chair in the person of Nicola Brogan, and then I'll come to our resident expert in the person of Kelly Armstrong.
I appreciate that one, Chair. Thank you. And thanks for your presentation, for coming along this afternoon. I suppose I'm going to make you repeat yourselves probably, but I want to go back to why the North has fallen so far behind when it comes to home decarbonisation. And Ciaran, you'd mentioned there in comparison to the South that there was two reasons. It was building standards and funding. Funding we can all understand. But when it comes to building standards, and I think Martin, you touched upon this as well. Could you maybe explain that a bit further, what you mean by that, please?
So we first of all, I think it was 2012, was there were building regulations. Effectively, it establishes the energy efficiency requirements when you're building, and we had been pushing for year upon year upon year, saying we need to upgrade. We fell very far behind, and then finally in 2022 we had a catch-up moment, but it was very much deemed as an interim step. And there was an acknowledgement that this is almost because we're so far behind, we have to do something. And at that stage, the Department of Finance said they were targeting the next increase to come in 23-24. So from that point, then there was a consultation that seems to have kind of like gone into the abyss a little bit. And we were very much hopeful that we were going to see something before the summer there. Again, here we are coming towards just into October now, and still no progress. So that's something, why exactly that's happening, we're not clear. And the interesting part about this is it's not just impacting on new build properties, it also impacts on refurbishments. So whenever you go in to do a refurbishment, if it's of a significant enough scale, then those building regulations kick in terms of increasing the thermal or the energy efficiency of the building or the project, and that really needs to be updated too. There's a real sense of having had that little burst of improvement in 22, then things have really slowed down.
And are there other reasons that you can see the why we're so far behind here in the north. I know those were the two that you'd highlighted because of, I say, the comparison to the south, but are there other reasons as well? Are they the main two that you'd be
Certainly, I don't see anything
about?
in terms of the technical ability. I mean, I can speak for architects working all across the island of Ireland, all across the UK, and are ready to take on any challenge. We have lots of architects who are doing work everywhere because you go where the work is. So if somebody said to me there's going to be a great big surge of work in Northern Ireland, well, my thing is great, because then people can get work on their doorsteps rather than having to travel further afield for that. So in terms of technical knowledge, technical ability and capacity, that certainly wouldn't be a great concern of mine, because my experience is that when people are given notice that there's going to be funding and a programme and the work's on the doorstep and it's profitable work, why would you turn that down? You know, that's the key thing. We know that every day there are people getting on planes heading across the water because that's where there's work.
Yes,
people are jumping in vans and down Cork and Galway and Dublin not because they're thinking that's where I want to go, I want to have a 2-hour drive ahead of me, because that's where the work is. And if the work was on the doorstep and it was well organised and it was a sufficiently profitable bit of work, they would be doing it, no bother.
I think, Nicola, just what we're probably seeing, this is in terms of being out on the ground, we're now seeing a divergence even between sort of the social housing sector and the private sector. The social housing sector is steaming ahead because they realise that this is an essential component of their business operations in terms of future-proofing their housing stock, etc., making it better for tenants. But there's a huge gap now between the social housing sector and the private sector. What I think is there's a huge cultural barrier in Northern Ireland. I think historically with the likes of RHI, etc., there's now a little scepticism among homeowners that is this something that it's right, is it the right solution? It goes back to my point about the one-stop shop or that information hub where you've got robust, credible, impartial evidence to support the retrofit solution. People are highly sceptical of the solar sales guy who comes around randomly and goes, I've got the solution for you, this is going to be brilliant, we'll put this on your roof, and then all of a sudden in a few years' time you realise it's not anywhere near efficient, you're consuming more energy. I think we do need an education piece to give assurance to homeowners. There's a little bit where people are reluctant to dip their toe in the water because they think there's funding coming down the line, so why should I pay for this if there's going to be all this money made available? If we look across at other jurisdictions, south of Ireland, England, etc., there's a lot of money being made available for retrofit, so everybody's thinking inevitably as a homeowner at some point it has to come to Northern Ireland. But even those that don't necessarily need any form of subsidisation are still hesitant because they're not sure that the solution that they're getting is the right solution for them. So there's a little bit of an education piece, as I said, an assurance to homeowners that there's reliable, accredited suppliers. Going back to Gavin's point about, if I'm going to invest in this and I'm going to spend £10,000-15,000 of my own money in upgrading and retrofitting my home, I want to know that the solution is the best possible solution as future-proofing my home for the next 15-20 years. It's not something that's going to be put in place and in 5 years' time I'm going to go have to rip the whole thing out. So there is a bit of an education piece, and there's now a gap, I would say, between the social sector and the private homeowner sector. Right. That's before we even come to the private rental sector, which is a whole different complex
Well,
issue.
actually, I was going to ask that next about your actual report. And
I'll go ahead. I'll come back to you, Pam. Go ahead. Sorry, Nick.
What sort of engagement you've had with other stakeholders in regards to report, and are people taking on the recommendations? I'm assuming with your forum you have the likes of Jan who represents groups like housing associations and private developers and private homeowners and that there. But more broadly, are people welcoming your report basically?
Yeah, we've had a lot of traction. We've had a lot of uptake on it, if you know what I mean. We did the previous report to that was actually in the planning system. And there was quite a lot of the recommendations in that actually filtered through to the revising and restructuring of the planning system. And again with sort of the decarbonisation report, there has been a lot of uptake. There's been a lot of interest. Obviously, as a forum, more widely, we've got reach in terms of those stakeholder groups. So we're very much advocates of getting that information out there. So it's been welcomed. We're probably at the stage now where we're trying to see some of those recommendations being implemented, if you know what I mean. So rather than it just being a report that everybody goes, that was good, and nothing happens, it's how can we actually move that forward and implement it. And it's even, Nicola, we appreciate that not everything and all the recommendations in that report are doable, But even in terms of, well, can we make small incremental steps, as I said, even in terms of preparedness, so that if we did have money, we're in a position to actually move forward? Because there are recommendations that I would say we could implement sequentially. So some of them could be implemented straight away with no great cost, but it's preparing us for retrofit and upscaling.
That's a sensible approach, and you have to be ambitious too. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, I had just wanted it was more maybe just to personalise it a little bit. There is a cultural learning that needs to happen about what our ambition is to change that. I think if we're being very blunt, gas is seen to be a very new technology in Northern Ireland, with our pipeline really only in the past 30 years. To step change that, homeowners, even our own customers living in our homes, when we are coming out to talk about, we want to try to future-proof this even further in a renewable way, and we're talking about electric first heating. The absolute utter fear that particularly older people living in independent living or over 55 accommodation around changing, no, we want you to put gas in because we know gas, we know what we're going to get, it's a new technology, when actually the world has moved on. If we're looking at it in a truly retrofit and sustainable way, we should be looking at, and I am not going to go into the whole debate about whether the grid can support all of that, but there is a huge fear around, what does that mean? Is it going to cost me more? My electricity bill is going to shoot through the roof. And actually we're finding in experiences when we're going in to do that engagement with customers, they're actually saying, no, we will stay with the older heating source. We just want it as it is because we're absolutely fearful of what it will mean, because we're counting our pennies to pay for other things. We've got food inflation, we've got actually, just their rent, they've got their bills to pay, they're worried about all of that, and this is an unquantifiable unknown. So it's actually about elevating the debate and the discussion out there to demystify, I suppose, and it's how we do that collectively together. And I suppose part of this report is about trying to demystify some of that this is where we need to go to, but that it is a journey, and we're not asking anyone to come and sprint. We just want to take that through at pace, admittedly, but not leaving people behind out of fear, because then we are going to leave the most vulnerable without that support.
You're right, Jan. With any change that goes, there's always an educational piece and a communication piece, I suppose, of what actually our objectives are, like more broadly than just yourselves. But listen, that's very helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Pam, were you looking at something that was said there just briefly?
Yeah, well, I just thought it's very interesting, and actually all the conversations we're having today seem to come back to the same thing around education and support and confidence, and giving people confidence to move out. Because you're right, there will be lots of people out there who actually do have money and have money to spend on the right things, but maybe don't have the confidence, as you say, or they're holding back thinking there's got to be a wee scheme come up here that I can tap into, and then that nervousness around field schemes or whatever from before. So I think that is really important. I suppose what do you see as kind of back to the one-stop shop stuff, but what do you see as maybe positive moves that the department could make in terms of providing that very basic confidence? I might think it's still very cross-departmental, the whole piece, because if people don't have the very basic skills to cope with everyday things, well, they won't get to these more complex matters, and being able to have the confidence to say that this is the right way to go or not. So how do we move forward with that, and how have you any recommendations that we could make to the department in terms of moving that forward?
One thing that as sort of industry representatives we would suggest is that we do move forward with some kind of plan or vision for what this looks like. Even if we can't fulfill all of that at this stage, I feel that what we do need to do is to produce that sense of confidence in both the public and in industry, to say this is where we are going. And I appreciate that sometimes that is restricted by budgets or by target change and so forth as well. But whilst we don't, even in the report, feel that all of this is achievable in the next 12 months, there are a lot of small term gains that we feel that could be achieved for perhaps less funding. We want as much as you can give us. But even with that, and whenever you hear the real stories of how your constituents are benefited by living in homes that are warm, that don't have mould, that their heating bills are reduced, the health's improved, their quality of lives are improved. I'm sure you're dealing with folks every day that have those concerns. We hear those as well, and to see that becoming reality, we feel that those good news stories then feed into a sense that this is more than just a cold piece of legislation about building changes. It's actually involving people's lives. It involves quality of life and being able to see that happening. So all of that we feel would be a great move by the department, saying actually let's get behind this, even having some pilot schemes, aim those schemes at where we can get the most benefit from, and if that is individuals where they don't have the ability to pay at the moment, let's see that regenerating something into the community. And then some of the other aspects where individuals maybe do have the ability to pay, that will happen a little bit more as well as we see that, and we see the networks of providers improving. And there's also confidence in that those networks are actually given warranties, they're given guarantees, so there's a confidence for the end user as well that they're covered by what's happening as well.
I can certainly give one really. It's always nice to have something which is really in reach, and then one that's maybe a little bit trickier. And the really in reach one is this: at the moment we have regularly a moment in time. Typically, it's in the winter, and somebody's boiler breaks down, and that's the moment whenever you have to make a decision about what you do next. And what is happening, amazingly, we are having that decision faced where your oil boiler breaks down, you're on the gas grid. And you'd think, well, of course, what's the lower carbon option? Certainly cost isn't really a big consideration. What's the lower carbon option? It is gas. Is it as good as moving towards a proper low carbon heat source? No. But is it better than oil? Absolutely. Why does the person get the oil boiler replaced with an oil boiler? Because in the middle of the winter, if you try and get an oil boiler replaced, it's not going to happen. If you try and get connected to the gas grid, it's not going to happen anywhere near as quickly as it is to get somebody out to get you a new oil boiler. So what do we need? We need to look at each of those situations where people are making decisions about the lower carbon option, and why is that difficult? Why is there not an assistance in place? And there's something very small that could be done there to kind of tide you over whilst you're waiting for your gas connection, so that you're not sitting in a cold house. And that's a very small one. The slightly more complex one is Belfast City Council are developing a pilot which is going to tackle one of the hardest challenges, I think, which is how do you retrofit street by street. So you don't go in little pockets, one house here, one house there. You come to the street, you knock every door and say, we're doing a programme. Now you might have a housing executive owned house, you might have a house that's been bought out, you might have a private rented house in that street. How do you deal with this cross tenure? Different grant schemes available, and even within the private housing you'll have somebody who's on a lower income and someone who's on a higher income, again different grants available. How do we have a scheme which comes in and hits that whole street, that upgrades it? All the houses are the same, there's efficiencies there, and I suppose my ask would be, as that comes forward to DFC in the next number of months, that there would be support from the committee and from the department for engagement in that pilot to try and find a way to kind of crack that really hard nut.
Thank you. And funny, pilot has been mentioned both in this and the other session. The sessions have interrelated very, very well. And I think sometimes we have become masters at pilots and disasters at actually implementing. We'd be better thinking of them as pathfinders.
Absolutely.
Yeah. To go back, because we're always moving on to the next pilot, and they're crucial, but we need to implement the learning and the good practice.
100%.
Okay, I'm coming now to Kelly. Kelly Lannery, please.
Thank you. Love the report. I could talk to you all day about every part of it, but a few things that I wanted to check. One Stop Shop needs to be independent. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. The accredited supplier framework has me very concerned. As you say, you don't want somebody correcting their own homework. Should that also be an independent, especially say of that development? Because there are examples of EPCA, getting the 92 point whatever, to get EPCA. Some people are just getting just above that, others are getting well above that, and it's like, is there something there about the accredited supplier framework maybe needs to be tied in with that one-stop shop and maybe be tied into that? What do you think?
I think just there's a couple of points here, Kelly. From what we've seen in other jurisdictions, the lack of an accredited supplier framework is disastrous. And if it's under just retrospectively, the damage reputationally may already have happened. Now, what you don't want in an accredited supplier framework is a heavily overly regulated, overly bureaucratic process, which then contractors and suppliers are going, this is too bureaucratic. We're not, it does need an accredited supplier framework, but we need to be very careful as to how heavily bureaucratic that process is. But come back to Ciaran's point, you can't mark your own homework. You know what I mean? So there has to be an element of independence there and accredited. And I think that goes back to the point about confidence for the consumer, for the householder, that they can give that assurance and confidence that, yes, we're moving forward with this. I've got impartial, objective information which has informed the best retrofit design for my property, and I'm now getting an accredited supplier to install and implement that. And so I think those things need to go hand in hand. Yes, they're interconnected, absolutely.
We would say to Kelly, just to back up Martin's comments, that right through from surveyor to designer to installer to those that sign off, that there's a level of confidence and a process that's in place that builds client confidence really in what they're getting, because we feel this is about quality. It's not about wasting funds across that, and we feel that all of those departments that would be involved in this process should actually have something independent there to actually just clarify what's in place. And that's a lesson from other regions where whenever there's too much of a close relationship between particular forms of either technology or advice and that, then it falls down. So there does need to be that level of independence.
On the education piece, I think there's as much education needs to happen to government and councils as there is to the public out there. Like we're losing £94 million quarter one and quarter two of 2025 of excess wind energy. It's not being used. Honest to goodness, we've got people living with fuel poverty. So I'm wondering, with that in mind, there is nowhere that records the value of carbon capture and how much is being saved. Is that a missing thing out of our budgets at the moment? Is it something that we should be thinking about? I know I looked at if we were to do huge retrofit, and I'm not going to say the figures because it was terrifying, but it only balanced out because I included the cost savings of carbon capture. But nobody seems to be talking about that in our budgets at the moment. How much are we wasting through the amount of carbon that we're emitting and how much we could be saving? That doesn't seem to be part of our budgeting process.
I mean, it would dramatically change the likelihood of different projects going ahead. We see that across lots of, not just in housing, but across all of if every time if you were looking at both the financial cost and the carbon cost, and you were giving them some sort of financial value of that carbon cost, you would be making very different budgetary decisions. So that I couldn't agree more on that. In terms of the wasted wind energy, one of the things that the Housing Executive has been doing, and the Housing Executive in many ways has been doing great work within the budget that it has around retrofit, and it has been utilising battery storage. Very interested in talking to Sony, the system operator for Northern Ireland, if there was to be battery storage at scale in a particular geographic area. That means you could then direct a lot of the wind energy into people's batteries in their house that they then get to use. And it's a matter of how we get it. I mean, it's highly complex stuff in terms of how you're able to make sure that wind goes into the battery in a way that at scale it works. There's no point in a house here and a house there, but if you take 500 houses or 1,000 houses and they all have a battery in that geographic location, suddenly it's of great interest, and you start to think about how you make use of that as a place for your waste wind energy to go. And I think there's such an opportunity around that sort of stuff that we need to. And it's not just DFC. This is a classic cross-governmental approach that's required.
Absolutely. One of the things that I'm not very keen on with the content of the fuel poverty strategy has been the idea that you would just target the vulnerable and increase their homes. I do believe that from government's point of view, a place-based approach where we have a multifaceted way of getting all tenures to come together, and the idea that Belfast City Council has of doing a street at a time. I'm sure you've seen the street in North Belfast where the Housing Executive has gone in and just done their houses, and you can point them out exactly which ones were done and which ones were private. There has to be something coming from that. Do you have any evidence of any of the funding that has gone through in, say, for instance, England, where they have managed to get private owners, private landlords, social housing renters all to come together to go forward with retrofitting?
Not from England, but I certainly have examples from the Netherlands where they go in and literally do at a street level across all tenure types, and their argument would be it's actually more cost effective to do it that way.
I think
Not even from an environmental point of view, which obviously it's much more efficient from an environmental point of view, but even from an economic point of view, it actually makes sense. Your example of the case study in North Belfast is a classic of, you know that sort of mishmash of, part of it just doesn't work. You know what I mean? So we do need to get that sort of cross tenure model very much at the forefront of how we move forward. Your point on carbon capture, just want to come back to very, very quickly. I think it's a missing piece of the jigsaw, and it's a missing piece of the jigsaw because I think if we capture this more effectively, the argument could be made much stronger to financiers. So we're talking to homeowners, we're talking to mortgage lenders, mortgage providers. They have got an obligation in terms of the carbon intensity of their loan book as well. So I think if we had that information, the discussion not just about the trade-off between the carbon budget and your financial budget, but also you've got a stronger argument to incentivise some of lenders in terms of their green mortgage products to provide more enticing loan options for homeowners as well.
It's one of our benefits of actually being so far behind that we're actually an area of opportunity for those lenders on greenwashing their money. My last just point is, so if the money was to come tomorrow, we're done for because we don't have the skills chain, we don't have anything like that. The place-based approach that I prefer, I think that would give the construction industry more confidence to stay and to work and to train and upskill people here, because there would be a chain of work to come. So you could pick, for instance, 20 streets in Belfast or Larne or a rural village or wherever and pick that out. It doesn't mean to say that we stop targeting vulnerable people, but we actually have a plan for Northern Ireland where we're going, we're taking it forward. Is that something, do you think, the market could handle if we were able to move that forward?
Very, very quickly, and I'll pass across to Gavin to come in there. I think I'd agree with you. I'm not really comfortable with some of the wordings in sort of the fuel poverty strategy either, because there's a lot of vulnerable households that don't necessarily show up on that, and certainly a lot of our more energy inefficient stock, shall we say, is in more rural locations. But in terms of scalability, in terms of getting that pipeline of work that we need, do we target those large urban dense areas? That's probably where we've got the most impactful, sort of, shall we say, impact in terms of making the most use of finance, making the better in terms of the environmental and in terms of the social as well. But the problem we potentially risk in not having a systematic approach here is all your contractors are going to target those because there's scalability, and you're leaving your more sort of rural, remote houses, which are actually probably the most energy inefficient.
That's where we build in social value, to say that they have to do them.
Know what I mean? So, we don't want to sort of everybody clamber in here and everybody else is left. So, this goes back to my piece about having the evidence to actually justify and robustly be able to say, in terms of a systematic upscaling and rollout of retrofitting, where is the information to support both the environmental in terms of SAP ratings and EPCs, but also the social, so there is a balanced trade-off in terms of how we implement this and roll it out.
Yeah, and I think too, Kelly, the reality is, as you said, if we started tomorrow, we're going to struggle. But if there's a reasonable pipeline, I have every confidence in the construction industry of Northern Ireland to respond. I come from a position of where I can't put a nail straight in the wall myself, but I really admire the industry you have every day. I'm sure your constituents, again, who you appreciate, a lot of them are SMEs, they're family-based companies, they problem solve, they innovate in terms of what they're doing. And I believe that if that pipeline of work comes through, they're already doing a lot of this work already within the private sector, and it certainly could be adjusted. There may be a need, obviously, to bring in new staff, but then that provides opportunities for the economy, it provides roles, jobs, training, and also an opportunity for individuals to be involved in an industry that sees 5 years' time what it actually looks like in terms of work. And companies can then move, and the research and development that they do can actually happen in line with that work. At the moment, what they will do is they will do work. And the construction is pretty straightforward in that builders will build what the client asks them to build. So if they've been asked to do certain work at the moment, if it's renovation work, or if it's new build, or if it's public sector work, they'll do that. Mm-hmm. If this work comes through and it's clear and it's obvious, then I think they will respond to be able to do that as well.
Just finally, Is there a way to train our civil service and our government about energy efficiency by actually getting them first to make their buildings energy efficient? And here's roasting the daylight, but I'm thinking about, they don't seem to understand, their house may not be retrofitted at home, so is there something we need to do there?
Commercial and public sector buildings are a much bigger by their nature
schools.
Option, but certainly it's always good to lead by example and see how those things happen.
And the process is starting with the climate action plan coming through. There's a public buildings element to that, which is going to really drive change, which is great to see. And in terms of the industry capacity, I bring us back to something like the gas network arriving in Northern Ireland. Why would you go out and become a gas fitter? Well, you go out because you can see that there is a guaranteed line of work. And it's not maybe, it might come. It's like people are pumping millions, if not billions of pounds into this. There's going to be a lot of work, so you will get trained. If someone says, look, we're talking about it, well, do you go and do it then? You don't. And that's just it's just human nature. I always think, you go back to that idea of what motivates a parent to give their child a nudge. You say, that's something you should look at. It's whenever there's a fairly solid chance that there are good opportunities. I mean, NIE Networks are doing a great job at the moment saying, look, electrification, the world is becoming more and more electrified. We need to get more people in. We need to have an upgrade in the grid. And they're making that journey. And of course, a lot of people are saying, yeah, get into electricity. Become an electrician because there's great opportunities, there's good salaries. That's the sort of thing that I think that if we get a really clear commitment from government. We haven't an investment strategy for Northern Ireland. It's been outstanding now for I don't know how long. But if that comes out and it says we are committed for 10 years and here's the funding that will be focused on enhancing homes and other buildings in terms of their thermal performance and decarbonising, that's the sort of thing that builds confidence. People will retrain and they'll have the appropriate skills.
Yeah, and that should link into the regional balance programme for government
absolutely.
requirement. So listen, just a real brief one. I actually mentioned earlier, and I do get an occasional chance to mention that I was previously a social worker. I much less often get the chance to mention the fact that I was once a fully qualified, in terms of Ireland, one of very few fully qualified radon remediation engineers. And I'm wondering, is there a lesson to be learnt there from how that issue was addressed, in the sense of a problem was identified, a low cost solution was brought forward, that was put into regulations both for private and public dwell, and that just became part of the construction phase. Is there a lesson to be learnt in that very practical and straightforward approach?
I mean, definitely in terms of part of the solution is regulation. And if you have a plot of land and you're thinking, I want to build something like that, and someone says, well, look, you can't be building it with a gas boiler or an oil boiler, it just won't pass. You won't get through. Then guess what? There's no gas or oil boiler. It changes. So that's part of it. But what I would say, as Martin mentioned at the very start, the vast majority of buildings we have are already here, and that is complex. And there is no regulatory element that can just solve that magically. We have, in the last 6 months, had our very expert conservation architects, very expert sort of climate-focused architects in a room together, trying to talk about what should a government scheme do to get the retrofit of our red brick terrace properties in Northern Ireland, improve their energy performance in a safe way that doesn't damage the property or damage the health of the occupants. And my goodness, is it complex? It's mind-bogglingly complex because there are so many twists and turns, and very rarely is that building going to be as it was originally built, because of course there will be alterations that have been made over the last 100 years. So it's not something that you can run into gung-ho and say it's one size fits all, that's the solution, off you go, and throw some money at it. It really needs to be targeted and very thoughtful.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much, Gavin, Martin, Ciaran and John. That really interesting interactive session, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you for bringing your expertise forward, both in terms of what you've provided and your engagement today. I appreciate it. Good luck in the future.
Thank you folks for having us.
Thank you. All the best. So members, a couple of follow-up actions I think that I want to kind of flag up. One being that I think we should write to the Department of Finance around the building regulations reforms as to when those are coming forward. They're clearly a crucial part of this element.
Which department?
Finance. The other thing that I think going from the session was around what engagement Department for Communities has had with counterparts in the 26 counties in the south around working together to achieve carbon targets across the island, but also I think specifically around whether or not there has been any discussion about potential shared island funding to assist with retrofitting, given it's so badly needed. I'd like to know if there's been any conversations, or can we in our advisory role kind of flag that to the department as something that may be worthy of consideration, if members are content.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Content.
So ask whether there have been any conversations yet in relation to the housing supply strategy or retrofitting specifically?
Retrofitting specifically is my question in relation to this. Okay. Retrofitting specifically, has there been
and
any?
The shared island fund.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can we also factor in the UK government, because they have a role to play in this as well, in the finance, the overall budget. The other thing I wanted to ask through you, Chair.
So just to clarify, so to ask, have they had any specific around specific additional funding on retrofitting?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the other one.
The other one, Chair, was there still some councils who haven't finished off their area plan yet?
Yeah, 9. I think there's 9 of them.
Could we maybe write and ask, but a pressure put on those councils?
They can't get, I know Ards and North Down can't get theirs signed off until 2032 because PA, not our Public Accounts Committee, but PAC have to sign them off. No, John O'Dowd had invested more money to try and process that, but they're a while slow. But they're all out of date because there's no carbon stuff in them.
We have asked for updates on that before. Have we asked for kind of a rolling update on that? Or I don't think
not
so.
that I'm aware of.
The rolling update was on the landlord scheme, but yeah, I think it's certainly valid that we write again to councils on those plans and ask them
when their local development plan will be finalised and whether or not.
And are they future-proofed?
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Chair.
Yes.
It was just on the retrofit. So the guys mentioned the Netherlands example.
Street by street, yeah.
Could we get more information on that?
Yeah.
I'm just very aware. I'm
Go
on
back and ask for that from Ciaran. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please,
Find out about that. Okay.
Kelly?
Could I suggest, I found it absolutely useful, the housing executive, that street that had the retrofitting done in North Belfast, if at some stage maybe we, not part of committee time because we're very busy, but if there could be a meeting set up for MLAs to go and have a look at those houses. They're roasting, absolutely roasting on the inside. They're a beautiful job, but when you look at the street, it's a mess. And that's why the place-based approach is better, but the difference that is made to those tenants is incredible. They're saving so much money. But it would be useful, I think, for everybody to see what it looks like.
I thought that idea around place-based and as well as reaching out to the vulnerable, that twin track approach has certainly got merit, so I think that's interesting. Anything else in terms of members are content with that proposal by Kelly? Yeah. And any other actions, members? No, okay, thank you. So moving on then to our agenda item 10, which is a forward work programme, a copy of which is at page 402. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme? And just before I return to that, can I raise 2 issues? Just to say, on the meeting of October 9th, which looks very, very busy with 5 briefings listed there, committee staff are waiting to hear back on whether some of those briefings will actually go ahead. So we don't anticipate having 5. It's a question of which ones out of that will come forward. The other thing to draw your attention, members, to is we have a request for our meeting on the 4th of December, an invitation from East Belfast Mission to host our meeting on that date at the Ciaran Centre, which has already been mentioned and dispatched earlier for its good work. Would members be content that we take a committee meeting out to there? Yeah.
Could we ask them for a tour of their hostel that's next door?
Yeah,
it's very good.
Yeah. Members content with that? So, forward work programme, any other comments, members? Kelly?
Could I just give my apologies for week commencing the 13th and 20th of October. Unfortunately, I won't be available for those meetings, Chair. Apologies. I will provide in advance of not being available any amendments that I've been talking to Liz about for the sign language. Yeah, for our consideration.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Okay, agenda item 11 then. Any other business, members? No other business. Thank you then, members. So date, time and location of our next meeting. Just before I go to that, I do want to thank committee staff for, I think that was a really interesting set of briefings the committee staff put forward for us today. and it led to a really good focus on a very, very important issue. So thank you to the staff, as always, for all of the work that is put into putting these meetings in place. I appreciate that. And just to advise members that our next meeting will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday 9th of October 2025, and we're in the Senate chamber for that meeting. So thank you for that, and the meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.